Chapter 1880. There was an irrigation ditch on the outskirts of Ihe City in Yuzhou. In autumn, the reeds were covered in a vast expanse of snow. Several riverside villages were scattered among them. A carriage turned from the official road to a small road. The coachman was a young man in strange clothes with a dull expression. Behind the coachman sat a man in plain, cotton-padded clothes. He leaned against the wall of the carriage with his legs dangling outside, gently swaying with the carriage. On the small road in the evening, the carriage caught up with an old farmer who had just finished his work. When the carriage passed by the old farmer, the man in cotton-padded clothes turned to look at the old man, who was looking at him curiously. The old man had a very ugly face. Although he was hunched, he was still half a head taller than the old people in the South. His footsteps were also quite vigorous. It was obvious that the old man must have been a good fighter when he was young. The man in cotton-padded clothes softly called for Mr. The coachman pulled the reins, and the carriage slowly stopped. The man jumped off the carriage and greeted with a smile, "Fourth Grandpa." The old farmer's face was full of astonishment. He did not know why this unfamiliar junior called him Fourth Grandpa. It was probably because he was intimidated by the cotton-clothed man's imposing manner that the old farmer stammered uneasily and did not dare to speak. The man in cotton-padded clothes smiled with the most authentic Yuzhou accent. "I am Chen Wang from the end of the village." "Fourth Grandpa, don't you recognize me?" The old farmer widened his eyes and looked at the young man who claimed to live at the end of the village. Then he suddenly realized, and a smile bloomed on his wrinkled face. "Little Wang?" Chen Wang grinned and said, "Yes." The old man sighed and then wondered, "Why did you come back? Didn't you go to the capital to take the exam?" Chen Wang smiled and said, "I finished the exam long ago. This time, I went home to take a look. Fourth Grandpa lent me 2 taels of silver. I dare not forget." The old man waved his hand and asked curiously, "How did you do?" Chen Wang said softly, "Not bad." The old man said, "Oh." Perhaps he was afraid of hurting the young man's face, so he did not get to the bottom of it. Moreover, the old man who had been dealing with the yellow soil all his life could not get an answer. He just sighed, "What a pity." Chen Wang's expression was calm, as if he did not understand the regret in the old man's words. Chen Wang and the old farmer walked back to the village side by side. They talked about this year's harvest, the marriages of their peers, and whether the elders in the village were still alive. Through chatting, Chen Wang learned that his yellow mud house had long been dilapidated. One of the walls had collapsed. This was within reason. He hadn't returned to his hometown for 10 years. How could an extremely simple house be safe and sound? Chen Wang's parents had passed away one after another before he went to take the exam. An ownerless house was not like those weak reeds that would flourish in the spring even if they withered in the autumn. There were some things that the old farmer didn't say. In fact, after this young man came to the capital, there was a woman in the village who would often clean up. She kept the village as clean as her own home. Year after year, many of the young men who secretly admired her gave up and got married and had children. Gradually, the virgin girl became an old woman. But now that she was no longer here, what was the use of saying these things to Chen Wang? Moreover, Chen Wang had stayed in the capital for so many years. Perhaps he didn't remember her? Otherwise, if he really cared, why didn't he send a letter back, even if he couldn't return home for so many years? When they were close to the entrance of the village, the old man raised his head to look at the village with smoke rising in spirals. He couldn't help but sigh. That girl's home was at the entrance of the village. What a virtuous child. Everyone within 100 li would give her a thumbs up. In the early years, the matchmaker almost broke the threshold of her home, but she didn't agree. Her parents couldn't do anything about it. No one expected that in the end, such a tragedy would happen. The common people all accepted their fate. If their fate was bad, they couldn't blame anyone. This was like getting an illness. If they could get through it, they could live. If they couldn't, then it was because the heavens didn't reward them with food. They could only be buried in peace. Chen Wang didn't enter the village. He suddenly stopped and asked, "Fourth Grandfather, where's her grave?" The old man was stunned. He lowered his voice and said, "How do you know she?" The old man didn't continue speaking. Chen Wang also didn't speak. The old man pointed in the direction of the ferry and said, "Over there. The grave mound is small, but easy to find." Wang took out a heavy money pouch and a letter. "Fourth grandfather, please help me pay off the village's debt. Give it to Li Zheng or the teacher from the nearby private school. It's written clearly on there." The old man hesitated, but didn't refuse in the end. He carefully took the letter and money pouch and asked, "Are you not going back to the village to take a look?" Wang shook his head and said, "I won't go. After visiting my parents' graves, I need to immediately return to Jing." The old man sighed emotionally. "You're in too much of a rush." Wang smiled. The old man had just walked a few steps when he suddenly turned back and asked, "Little Wang, you're really a high-ranking official in Jing?" Wang didn't seem to know how to answer. A high-ranking official in Great Peace City? High-ranking official Huangzi, in the center of power, a ruler of a dynasty? So he could only smile and say, "It's not that big." The old man said with relief, "Then it's very good. Fourth grandfather knew a long time ago that you wouldn't be bad." Wang's smile was light. The old man didn't forget to glance at the young person standing next to Wang. When he turned and left, he was full of suspicion. That person's clothing was very strange. Wang and the young eunuch, of the same age as the country, slowly walked forward. His parents' graves were not far from the village. Wang raised his hand and brushed the reeds. When he had studied hard, he didn't even dare to think about becoming a grand scholar or getting a place in the imperial exam. His parents didn't have such hopes. They only felt that their son being able to read and write was a good thing to bring glory to their family. Bailiang was very cold. It was very good if each family could produce a scholar. It was very different from the Central Plains, especially the rich Jiangnan. That place was very particular about passing down the family through farming and studying. In Bailiang, it was common for young people to join the army, but it was rare to find someone with a book in their hands. When he had just entered the capital to participate in the imperial examination, Bailiang was the only one that had not set up an examination hall in Great Peace City. He was unfamiliar with the place and did not have the care of the seniors from his hometown in the imperial examination. He could only stay in a small temple. Bailiang's accent caused him to run into resistance everywhere. The same ancient book was sold to him at a much higher price. Even after he had participated in the court examination, he still did not have any friendships in his generation. Bailiang was the only one. Jean Lanting's meteoric rise in Great Peace City and Yin Jiexi's rise to become a relative of the imperial family were due to personal grievances and did not change this. Even though Yao Baifeng was the left chancellor of the Imperial College, he did not have the ability to change this. And he, Chen Wang, the Chun Xiaobao in the eyes of all the civil and military officials, was the left scattered cavalry of the province, and the future Grand Secretary that the Emperor relied on the most. He had the heart and the power, but he could not do it. Chen Wang walked slowly. On his two sides were reeds that were taller than a person's head. The large and soft reed flowers were blown up by the autumn wind and landed somewhere unknown. Chen Wang arrived at the grave mound and pulled out the messy weeds. Then he straightened his clothes and knelt down to kowtow 3 times. The son wanted to take care of his parents, but the parents did not wait. The old man that this cotton-clothed man respectfully called fourth great-grandfather probably did not know in his life that the 2 items that the junior had handed to him, the money pouch and the letter, were worth thousands of gold just from the 2 words Chen Wang at the end. In the 20 years of Bailiang's history, there were only a few people in the Liyang officialdom. Among them, Jean Lanting was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. Yin Jieshi was a scholar, and the Confucian scholar Yao Baifeng was in charge of the Imperial College. However, even if the 3 of them were added together, they might not be as important as Chen Wang. It could even be said that in a large sense, it was this scholar from Bailiang who had left his hometown. His 2 secret letters changed the structure of Bailiang. On the way back, Chen Wang met a sturdy man of the same age. After seeing him, the man's expression was complicated. There was resentment, reverence, surprise, and confusion. The man took a deep breath and handed Chen Wang a coarse cloth bag with a straight face. "These are the things my sister left behind." They are the books you left behind. I'm returning them to you. Chen Wang took the cloth bag and was lost in thought. The man turned around and strode away. He stopped and said with a hoarse voice, Wang, although my sister, don't think that she died in a dubious way. She's cleaner than anyone else. Chen Wang covered his mouth and looked at the back of the man who used to put his arm around his shoulder and call him brother-in-law. He said vaguely, I'm sorry. The man muttered, You can say that to her. Chen Wang was silent. Blood seeped out between his fingers. He did not move for a long time. Chen Wang carried the cloth bag to the ferry and found the small grave. The eunuch was nowhere to be found. Chen Wang sat cross-legged in front of the grave. He sat across from the small grave. There was an illiterate woman who would find a clean place under the sun to dry her books. She would open them one by one and put them away one by one. There was an unmarried woman who would go to the small ferry when no one was around. She would look into the distance again and turn around again and again. Chen Wang gently opened the cloth bag and looked down. There were familiar books such as the Book of Rites and the Great Learning. There were also older books such as 3,000 books of elementary learning. Back then, when they were working in the fields, washing clothes at the ferry, picking reeds during the heavy snow, he would often recite to her. 10 years had passed between this year and that year. He and she were separated by yin and yang. Chen Wang closed his eyes and read softly. The country is in trouble. The king dies in the country. The doctor dies in the ancestral temple. The people die in the countryside. The gentleman said, Great virtue is not an official. Great Tao is not a tool. Great faith is not a greed. And great time is not uniform. Those who observe these four can aspire to learn. Let the people of the world be united in worship and worship, as if on top of it, as if on the left and right of it. In the twilight, the scholar was reading. The reeds swayed gently in the wind. It was like a woman nodding her head and smiling like a flower. Chapter 1881. The 3 riders and 1 donkey circled around Wuxia town and came to the memorial arch at the foot of Mount Wudong. Su Fengyin, Fan Xiaochai, and Chun Tianyuan dismounted together. Dong Tai patted the old donkey's back after landing and started chanting. Chun Tianyuan looked up at the words Wudong Dang Xing, written by ancestor Lu himself. He did not look like an ordinary swordsman, but was full of spirit and fighting spirit. Su Fengyin suddenly turned to Fan Xiaochai and said, Go to the southeast of Liang. If you can find that guy in 2 years, help me pass a message to him. Tell him that he has to pay back the money he owed me. Fan Xiaochai frowned and said, According to the spies of Fu Shui Room, the villages and towns that are scattered all over the place. It's not easy to find him with the scattered clues from before. Su Fengyin nodded and said, Finding a needle in a haystack depends on fate. Just think of it as doing your best. I don't expect you to find that guy. Fan Xiaochai asked with a straight face, Can you change the spy? I'm good at killing and only killing. There are many people in Fu Shui Room who are more suitable for finding people. Su Fengyin smiled and said no. There was a hint of anger in Fan Xiaochai's eyes. It swayed like water plants in her limpid eyes. She was angry but did not dare to say anything. Su Fengyin teased, Maybe in less than 2 years, you'll hear the news of my death. Won't that save you a lot of trouble? Fan Xiaochai said stiffly, The happiest thing in the world is cutting off the head of one's enemy with one's own hands. Su Fengyin sighed and said helplessly, You only dare to show your true feelings in front of me. If Lu Qiu was here, would you have the courage? Fan Xiaochai smiled sweetly and asked, Is Chu Lushan here? Su Fengyin said unhappily, That's why I said that evil people can only be dealt with by evil people. Fan Xiaochai took a deep look at the young lord and mounted his horse again. After a moment of hesitation, he reached for the hilt of the saber at his waist. This pawn of crossing the river? Su Fengyin smiled and said, It's just a temporary loan. You still have to return it. Fan Xiaochai sped away on his horse. Chun Tianyuan had been immersed in the magnificent sword intent of ancestor Lu's 4 words. He was awakened by the sound of horse hooves gradually fading away. He asked doubtfully, Why did she leave? Su Fengyin said indifferently, I sent her to the Central Plains to do something. Oh, Chun Tianyuan replied. He waited until the woman and her horse had completely disappeared from his sight before he mounted his horse and looked in the direction of her disappearing figure. His heroic spirit overflowed as he laughed heartily. May the world know of my sword. There are only three: Qing Shan, Qing Shui, and Fan Xiaochai. Su Fengnian sneered. If you have the ability, say that to her yourself. After Chun Tunyuan mounted the horse, he slightly straightened the famed sword at his waist. Why should I say such annoying words? Su Fengnian said, but you're half-master and I don't like to hear them either. After Chun Tianyuan covered his face with the raw skin, he spat out, what does it have to do with me? And galloped away. Dong Tai smiled. I'm fine with it. Su Fengnian rolled his eyes. I really can't stand this young banished immortal's temper. Dong Tai sighed with emotion for no reason. Perhaps when Li Chungang first came out, he was also this annoying. As far as I know, the heroines and fairies of Jianghu just happened to fall for this. Su Fengnian grimaced and said resentfully, that can't be, right? Dong Tai dismissed it with a laugh. Su Fengnian sighed heavily and muttered, right now, I'm a little depressed. Dong Tai asked, are you waiting for someone? Su Fengnian sighed and said, although Song Yinqing once tried to kill me with the 14 new swords, it didn't stop me from having a good impression of the Dongyue sword pool. As for Chai Qing Shan, who took over the sword pool, it can be said that an exchange of blows leads to friendship. There are people in Jianghu who can't be hated, whether they're friends or foes. Chai Qing Shan Wang Mingyin outside Xiangfan City is the same, and Catman Han Xianxia outside Shenwu City is the same. Dong Tai was silent. The ancestor of the Wu family sword tomb, who had a deep relationship with him and the young king, returned to the Central Plains after delivering the swords. It seemed that he had completely retired from Jianghu. Dong Tai seemed to realize something and asked curiously, why did you let that woman leave Bailiang at this time? Did you hope that she could take Chun Tianyuan to the Central Plains? Su Fengnian smiled and said, the main thing was to find her, and at the same time take away that eyesore banished immortal, killing two birds with one stone. The young king held the hilt of his sword and stood under the archway. The breeze brushed his face, making him look like an immortal. The peach blossom sword deity stood side by side with him and looked into the distance with his sword hanging from his waist. He was the number one sword deity in the world. Su Fengnian asked softly, the old man with the sheep fur coat, old Monster Wang, and Chao Chongqing, they all left their fates in the human world. Old Huang also left a sword manual for me. Dong Tai, what about you? The peach blossom sword deity, who entered Taoism through swordsmanship and stood shoulder to shoulder with ancestor Liu and Li Chungang at the top of the sword forest, said calmly, I, Dong Tai, don't want to die. Su Fengnian said enviously, you're so cool. Dong Tai saw Chai Qing Shan and the others coming slowly from afar. Obviously, he had no intention of accompanying Su Fengnian. He turned around and led the donkey up a mountain. Chai Qing Shan and Xianxia walked together. The divine fist of the Central Plains, Feng Zongxi, and the fairies of the Piao Peak also joined in the fun. However, the Snow Hut Spear Saint Li Zhongho and his disciples did not appear. Su Fengnian's left shoulder was suddenly patted heavily. He turned around and saw no one. He turned to the other side and still saw no one. Su Fengnian pretended to be surprised. Soon, a little girl who was squatting on the ground jumped up and laughed. Are you scared? Su Fengnian squinted his eyes and smiled. The corners of his mouth curled up, and his smile was especially gentle. Every time he saw her, from the first meeting to the second meeting, he only felt happy. Su Fengnian stretched out his hand and rubbed her hair. Oh, you've grown taller. She put her hands on her hips and raised her chin high. She puffed out her chest and did not hide her pride. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, where are the little monks Nanbei and Nanbei? She rolled her eyes and said, stupid Nanbei. He's talking to a little Taoist boy called Yu Fu. I don't want to play with them. You don't know. A little bald head and a little scholar. When these two are together, they like to talk to each other. It's even more boring than when those big old bald heads at home gather together to talk about scriptures and quarrel. Then what about your parents? I'm so worried. Not long ago, there was a female pilgrim from Jiangnan on the mountain. I don't know how she recognized my father. She cried so hard. My mother was so angry that smoke was coming out of her 7 orifices. My father took the initiative to wash his clothes for several days, but it was no use. Yesterday, he even borrowed some copper coins from the old Taoist of Wudong Mountain, saying that he would let my mother go down the mountain to buy some rouge and face powder. And your mother didn't agree? How could that be? It's not like you don't know that my mother will compete with anyone, but not with rouge and face powder. When she got the money, she went down the mountain to the town at the foot of the mountain. When she returned to the mountain, she fiddled with her clothes for almost 2 hours before she was willing to see anyone. Was her father scared? Nonsense. My father kept saying that my mother was as beautiful as a fairy. Unfortunately, when my mother finally calmed down, the female pilgrim used the excuse of leaving to find my parents. After seeing my mother's makeup, the woman didn't say anything. She just glanced at my mother from the corner of her eyes, and then the corners of her mouth curled up. In the end, she ignored my mother and only cared about politely greeting my father. When she left, I saw her quite clearly. She secretly curled her lips at my mother. In this way, there was no and then. Lizzie, your mother has met her match. I didn't think so at the time, but now that I think about it, it really was quite hurtful. Actually, it's my fault. When my mother was fiercely applying rouge and face powder, I didn't pay much attention. Otherwise, my mother would definitely look better. It's fine. As long as your father thinks your mother looks good, it's fine. That's true, but he has a disciple called Nanbei. At that time, my father really had no other choice. So he asked, Nanbei, do you also think that your master's wife is the most beautiful woman in the world? Guess what? Nanbei replied, Master, you said that monks don't lie. After that, my mother pulled my father's ear, and my father pulled Nanbei's ear. These 3 are really too much. They're like children who can't grow up. It makes me very worried. Su Fingyan, why don't you take me to Mount Qingliang to play? Liangzhou City's meat buns are delicious, but they're a bit expensive. Su Fingyan didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at the girl with her head tilted. He didn't want to disappoint her, so he bent his finger and lightly tapped her forehead. You could go to Mount Qingliang to play, but you have to get your parents' permission. She nodded her head like a chick pecking at rice. Then, she tugged on Su Fingyan's sleeve and said in a low voice, When you get to the mountain, see my father. Remember, if you see my father turn around and go back to his room, immediately run away. Su Fingyan was confused. The girl said embarrassedly, These past few years, my father has liked to sharpen his knife when he has nothing to do. Su Fingyan was speechless. Chapter 1882. At this time, Chai Qingshan and his party were approaching the archway. Chai Qingshan was standing under the steps. The old man nodded to greet him. Feng Zongxi and Lu Jiejuan, the 2 famous Jianghu bigwigs, were actually rising stars compared to Chai Qingshan, a martial arts grandmaster who was truly famous in the imperial court. At this time, the 2 of them respectfully cupped their fists and saluted to the young lord, loudly announcing their names. Su Fingyan stretched out his hand and said with a chuckle, This king is only a pilgrim of Wudong Mountain today. You don't have to be so polite. The Li Thing secretly made a face. Su Fingyan smiled. She coughed lightly and winked at him. Su Fingyan held back his laughter and said seriously, Let me introduce you. This is Miss Li. She is the most chivalrous and righteous. She is also good at martial arts. People call her. Su Fingyan paused for a moment and quickly turned his head to look at her and winked at her. Back then, when they were roaming Jianghu together, one of their favorite things was to give themselves nicknames. At that time, except for Huang, the other 3 fledgling Jianghu birds were all short-sighted. The only nicknames they could come up with were probably Feng Zongxi's Divine Fist of the Central Plains. They could come up with anything to scare people, and the bolder it sounded, the better. That year, Miss Li Zi, who ran away from home, gave herself no less than 20 nicknames. She even lectured Su Fingyan and the guy with the wooden sword. We Wulin heroes can only give wrong names, but not wrong nicknames. Therefore, People in Jianghu must be very careful when dealing with nicknames. After Su Fengyan read her lips clearly, he continued without leaving a trace. Jianghu people call you Fairy Tongxian. It's only because Miss Li is proficient in all of the sabers, swords, spears, and staffs that you're proficient in, that you're able to form your own sect. The girl didn't care about the posture of a heroine and hurriedly reminded, My Qin Gong, don't forget to tell me about it. Su Fengyan could only obediently fill in the gaps and said, Fairy Li's Qin Gong is also very good. It can be said that you are unparalleled in Jianghu. Feng Zongxi and Lu Jiejuan, who were experienced in Jianghu, had sharp eyes. Although they didn't know what the young king was singing, they still did a full set of Jianghu etiquette with the girl. After a full set of etiquette, she, who was addicted to being a heroine, was so happy that she couldn't close her mouth. Suddenly, she whispered, Su Fengyan, do you still remember our agreement? Su Fengyan smiled and nodded. Living, if you can lie, never stand. Jianghu, if you can fly, you. She patted Su Fengyan's shoulder rudely. This king will go first. This king will Jianghu. To everyone. To go Jianghu head. Then, he crouched down and carried her on his back. His figure flew up like a rainbow. The two of them arrived at the top of Big Lotus Peak. Su Fengyan still carried the heroine on his back, just like when she was tired and wanted him to carry her. She leaned on his back and whispered, Su Fengyan, you have always treated me as a sister, right? Su Fengyan nodded. She suddenly smiled. It's okay. Su Fengyan turned his head slightly and said with a bitter face, You hurt my feelings. She bumped her forehead against his. Su Fengyan turned his head again, full of smiles. She hugged his neck and carefully asked, Su Fengyan, if I take stupid Nanbei and leave Bailiang, will you be angry? Su Fengyan shook his head. Of course not. You are a heroine who roams Jianghu. Nanbei is a monk who chants Buddhist scriptures. Why should you get involved? She sniffled. Su Fengyan comforted her. I will definitely find you in the future. She didn't say anything. Between the mountains and rivers, the girl's thoughts were better than all the poems. Near the girl's house was a hastily built thatched cottage. A white-robed monk who was originally sitting on a stool in front of the house sighed. When he saw this scene, the middle-aged monk who was washing his wife's clothes did not bother with the washboard. He suddenly stood up and strode towards the simple thatched cottage. Li Donghai quickly jumped off his back and shouted at Su Fengyan, The situation is tense. Let's go. Su Fengyan didn't say anything and immediately ran away. The white-robed monk quickly rushed out of the house with a kitchen knife in hand. He looked around with a murderous look. This murderous look was probably not inferior to Dong Tai's Taiya, sword at the foot of the mountain. One must know that in the past, Chao Chongqing's heavenly image state was the most outstanding, Dong Tai's finger mystery sword was the most powerful, and finally, Li Dongxin's Vajra state of the two Zen temples was the most invincible. Li Dongxin's aura was like a Buddha lying down, sitting, and standing. There were only two people in the world who weren't afraid of Li Dongxin, his wife and daughter. The girl happened to be one of them, so she didn't care about her father. She put her hands behind her back, hummed a tune, and leisurely strolled elsewhere. This daughter who didn't know how to love her father. The white-robed monk sighed heavily, put down the kitchen knife, sat back on the stool, and continued to wash clothes. When the little monk Nanbei returned to the thatched cottage, he heard his master talking to himself. The little monk moved his stool and sat down, asking, Master, are you reciting scriptures? You can say that. It's just a little difficult. Every household, temple has its own difficult scriptures. Master, but the old abbot said that scriptures are the easiest to recite in the world. That's why the abbot is the abbot. You can only be the disciple of the abbot's disciple. Sigh, Master. What if I can't find a disciple in the future? If our temple wasn't sealed off, it would be simple. Find a dark and windy day, Master will bring you a big sack and catch a little bald head. Now it's difficult. Master, my disciple is far worse than the old abbot's disciple. Master, just say that I'm not as good as you. That won't do. How can there be such a shameless master? Master, today, Yu Fu helped someone read their fortune and wrote a letter to their family. The two elders insisted on giving Yufu money. Yufu couldn't refuse them no matter how hard he tried. Yufu knew that us master and disciple need to spend money frequently, so he gave the money to disciple. Disciple will return the money to him now. Nambe, master is actually very proud to have a disciple like you. Master, I'll definitely give this money to master's wife. All right, where's master's wife? Your master's wife, sleeping. Everyone loves to sleep, but there are very few people who understand the samadhi. Otherwise, why would the ancients say sleeping together is the most virtuous? Your master's wife is even better than master. Master, I only know that master's wife's snoring is very powerful. Master can sleep better than anyone else. You're even more powerful. Oh, stupid Nambe, you've improved. Huh. The two bald heads, one big and one small, touched their bald heads almost at the same time. The white-robed monk touched his head and looked into the distance. He said softly, "The black hair on your master's wife's head is the temple in master's heart. The wrinkles at the corner of her eyes are the scriptures that master never gets tired of looking at. Her snoring is the dharma that master never gets tired of hearing." The little monk was dumbfounded. He didn't know why his master suddenly became so poetic. Then, he heard his master's wife snort softly behind them. She laughed and scolded, "Damn it." The little monk turned his head and glanced at his master's wife, who was walking back into the house. He then looked at his master's serene face and sighed. "Master." The white-robed monk didn't look back. He lowered his head and washed his clothes. He said softly, "Your master's wife thinks that she doesn't look good with rouge. She just wants to hear master say that she looks good. But she doesn't know that in master's eyes, she's always so beautiful." The little monk stammered, "Master, master's wife has already gone far." The white-robed monk murmured, "Is peace and quiet far away? Not far. Is the city far away? Not far. Is life and death far away? Not far. Then master's wife and master will naturally be very close." The little monk was confused. He said with heartfelt admiration, "Master, you really have the root of wisdom." The white-robed monk tipped a chestnut on his stupid disciple's bald head. "You're asking for a beating. How can a disciple praise his master for having the root of wisdom?" The little monk looked innocent. The middle-aged monk with his back to the cottage lowered his voice. "Has your master's wife really gone far?" The little monk turned his head and looked back in an instant. Obviously, he was already very familiar with this action. He nodded and said in a deep voice, "Master's wife has closed the door." The middle-aged monk said, "Oh." The little monk sighed and moved the bucket and washboard. The white-robed monk smiled and praised, "Disciple, you also have the root of wisdom." The little monk didn't say anything. The white-robed monk folded his hands on his knees and leaned back a little. He looked up at the sky. This poor monk has comprehended all the scriptures and dharma in the world. This poor monk has seen all the beautiful scenes in the world. Only that face that is often covered with thick rouge can never be enough. The white-robed monk smiled and touched his head. "You've become a Buddha." Chapter 1883. If one stood at the top of the big Lotus Peak and looked down, the two mountain paths in the north and south were like two dragons lying majestically on Mount Wudong. As a famous scenic spot on Mount Wudong, the elephant pool was even more crowded. Family members and visitors lingered here, forgetting to go home. There was a Jianghu man with a loud voice standing on the blue stone beside the pool, talking loudly about the various wonders and anecdotes of the elephant pool. He said that the Wudong senior sword maniac Wang Xiaoping had once secluded himself to comprehend the sword here, which led to the soul-stirring battle with Wang Xianxia of the martial emperor city. He also said that the current Prince Liang had practiced his blade here for many years. Before he left the mountain, he was able to force the waterfall to reverse its flow with one strike, which was so powerful that it could reach as far as 10 miles away. The young men and women who listened were all swayed. They were still inexperienced, but still looked forward to the young heroes of Jianghu. Everyone was overwhelmed with emotion, as if they had personally witnessed the peerless demeanor of the young martial arts master. There was a pavilion near the elephant pool. Between the elephant pool and the pavilion, There were many stalls selling incense and candles, fortune-telling for people, and all kinds of clever items. There were even hawkers who cooked on the spot, selling wudong sesame seed cakes, Taoist stir-fried vegetables, calming soup, and so on. A young man with a bucket on his shoulder stood dumbfounded outside the dense crowd. If he wanted to carry 2 buckets of water, wouldn't he have to fight his way out? He could only follow a deep bluestone path back to the cottage where the mistress was temporarily missing. He put down his shoulder and bucket, took a gourd ladle, and bent down to scoop up a ladle of water from the bottom of the water tank. He slowly walked to the vegetable garden and leisurely watered it. After autumn, the greenery of the vegetable garden was not as rich as in spring and summer. It looked a little lonely. He finally squatted at the edge of the vegetable garden with the gourd ladle and wandered thousands of miles. The peach blossom sword deity stood up and walked toward the hut after sensing a familiar aura. He saw Dong Tai, who was leading the donkey, standing outside the short bamboo fence. The peach blossom sword deity didn't push the donkey away until he saw its owner. He fastened the reins and sat down on the small bamboo chair the young man brought over, his buttocks cold. Because Su Fengyin was carrying Li Ti on his back, he was able to reach the summit earlier than Dong Tai. "Have you been LV zooting?" he asked with a smile. Dong Tai nodded. "If it wasn't for that tablet, I wouldn't have recognized it." Su Fengyin asked again, "How's the calligraphy?" Dong Tai said indifferently, "Boring." Su Fengyin said with a clear conscience, "When I left the mountain, I wasn't even in the first rank. It's normal for me to be lacking in spirit." It turned out that the simple LV zooting was built 700 years ago. According to the records of the county, before the young LV zooting made Mount Wudong a place of cultivation, he climbed the mountain alone with a sword. When he was halfway up the mountain, he looked into the distance. An old man holding a walking stick appeared and asked LV zooting, who was not famous at the time, about the way of immortality. LV zooting gave him a prophecy and helped him to attain immortality. In the end, there was a poem that spread widely. It was said that it was written by LV zooting. "Walking alone, sitting alone, I don't know the world. Only the old locust spirit knows that the immortals have passed." The poem was carved on an ancient tablet by the Wudong Taoists, but the writing was eroded by time. Before Su Fengyin went down the mountain to practice his saber, a young martial granduncle riding a bull was pushed out by his senior brother. He asked Su Fengyin for the tablet inscription that was changed to cursive. Dong Tai looked around, happy and content. Su Fengyin joked, "There are so many martial arts masters on Mount Wudong now. Just in Nanjiang, there's the master saber master Mao Shulang, Cheng Baishuang, who's trying to become the scholarly sage, Ji Luin and Wei Miao, and Xue Songwan and Xu and Zhao." Dong Tai's words were shocking. "When I was climbing the mountain just now, I saw Gu Jiantang, and then I saw Xianyuan Qingfeng in the LV zooting." Su Fengyin frowned. "It's not strange that I didn't notice Gu Jiantang climbing the mountain, but Xianyuan Qingfeng was close at hand." Dong Tai hit the nail on the head. During the battle outside Great Peace City, Chao Changqing seemed to favor this woman who blocked the way. Xianyuan Qingfeng benefited greatly from this, and now he's only a step away. Su Fengyin sighed. "So that's how it is. The opportunities of this woman in charge of the Great Snow Plains can't be explained with common sense." Lu Songtao, Zhao Huangchao, Wang Xianji, and Chao Changqing, they either taught her everything or enlightened her. In the end, she became one of the few masters in the world. Dong Tai said with a bit of sarcasm, "You missed out on the most important person, didn't you?" Su Fengyin's face was immediately filled with embarrassment. Dong Tai suddenly asked, "Do you need me to help you block Gu Jiantang, whose intentions are unclear?" Su Fengyin only felt confused. He didn't know why this aloof, peach blossom sword god would suddenly be so kind. After all, Wang Xianji had already come to a conclusion about Dong Tai's character. The general idea was that Dong Tai was extremely passionate about the sword and was the most emotionless. Therefore, he was the most compatible with the way of the heavens. Moreover, Gu Jiantang, who was on the cusp of the Liang imperial court, left his territory without permission and chose to travel incognito to Mount Wudong. It could be said that he had entered the hinterland of Bailiang alone. It was obvious that he wouldn't cause any trouble on Mount Wudong. Even if Su Fengnian wasn't at the peak of his realm, he still had a high chance of winning against Gu Jiantang, who had been hiding his strength for many years. Just as Su Fengnian was puzzled, Dong Tai coughed softly and disappeared in an instant. Su Fengnian subconsciously looked towards the purple bamboo fence and found that even the old donkey had disappeared. With an ashen face, Su Fengnian turned his head stiffly and looked over. Sure enough, in the garden at the northeast corner of the thatched cottage, some of the greenery that had been growing well had been eaten away. It was like a landscape painting by a famous master that had been dug out by an ignorant child. Previously, a white-robed monk had turned around and walked into the cottage with a kitchen knife. Su Fengnian did the same. Gnashing his teeth, he ran back to the thatched cottage and quickly took down the cold knife hanging on the wall. After leaving the cottage, he angrily said, "Dong Tai, if you have the guts, don't run. I'll treat you to donkey roasted meat tonight." As a martial arts evaluation grandmaster, Dong Tai deliberately concealed his aura. Even Su Fengnian couldn't find any clues. Su Fengnian squatted on the ground and sighed. It was really a mother-of-asterisk-cur disaster. Sometimes when God punched you, he didn't give you a date to eat, but another punch to the head. When Su Fengnian caught a glimpse of a dress from the corner of his eye, he felt as if he was struck by lightning. When it rains, it pours. Su Fengnian was worthy of being called a king with a different surname and a great pillar of the country. He made a prompt decision. Regardless of whether he could hide for the first time or not, if he could hide for one more day, he would live for one more day. Therefore, when Su Fengnian was about to leave, Jiang Ni's voice filled with grief and indignation came from behind. "Surnamed Su, you're dead today." Chapter 1884. Carrying the red sandalwood box on her back, Jiang Ni suddenly soared into the sky with her sword. She stepped on the great Liang Dragon Sparrow sword. After the flying sword suddenly stopped, she looked down at the entire big lotus peak with her red eyes. Her murderous aura was shocking. It was unimaginable that a small vegetable garden could make two grandmasters regard it as a pool of thunder. Su Fengnian was out of Jiang Ni's expectations. Not only did he not directly slip down the mountain, he did not even go too far. Instead, he slyly hid in the crowd near the elephant washing pond. He squatted behind a crowded stall and bought 2 pieces of Wudong sesame seed cake from the still charming lady boss. He chewed and swallowed very slowly, as if he was tasting his last meal. The lady was also curious about why this handsome young man squatting by her feet was not willing to sit down. She blushed. Could it be that he had that kind of thought? She did not have too many ripples in her heart. She only felt that if she knew the situation would be like this, she would have asked for 2 more copper coins from him. Next to this stall was an old Taoist with a goatee who was interpreting the marriage fortune sticks for people. He was wearing an old Taoist robe that was heavily mended. Looking at the style, it was obvious that he was not a Taoist from Wudong Mountain. On the small table, there was a large bamboo pot that was polished until it was shiny, allowing customers to draw lots and then interpret the fortune sticks to receive money. Su Fengnian looked up and was surprised that this stall's business was booming. There were no less than 30 to 40 devotees waiting to draw lots. The old Taoist calmly sat behind the table, squinting his eyes and twirling his beard. The customer opposite the table was a graceful young woman. She was probably a pilgrim from Gangnam-do who came all the way to Wudong Mountain to burn incense. Although she was not tall and her face was slightly immature, the weight of her chest was very heavy. The old Taoist calmly lifted his but slightly to glance at her waist. TSK, what a small waist. He was worried that her waist would be blown apart by a gust of wind. Su Fengnian couldn't help but curse silently. When he was down and out, he had also done this kind of business without any capital, but he had never encountered such a good situation. Often when the bustling temple fair was over, there were no customers with a pair of hands. Looking at Su Fengnian's expression, the woman chuckled softly and said, "Gongzi, although this old immortal Wu is not a Wudong Taoist, within a radius of 100 li, I have heard that his marriage fortune stick is extremely effective. I have seen with my own eyes that quite a few rich young ladies from Liangzhou came here to draw lots. There were even people who rushed over to give money to Elder Immortal Wu after they got what they wanted. At most, each person gave 10 taels of silver. It was truly a sincere heart. Su Fengyin took a big bite of Wudong's spring sesame seed cake and said snappily, "If I set up a stall here to ask for money, I would also be willing to spend money to hire some women to act. Over time, even if it doesn't work, it will still work." The woman didn't know whether to laugh or cry. As a widowed lady, she also went next door to draw lots with more curiosity than hope. After hearing this young customer boasting so much, she couldn't say anything unpleasant. She could only say, "Gongzi, you really love to joke." Su Fengyin dismissed it with a smile. After the young lady with a slender waist and spectacular breasts shook a lot, she held it tightly in her hand and looked down timidly. She was at a loss. She stretched out her hand to hand the marriage fortune stick and asked delicately, "Taoist priest, what is the meaning of this stick?" Perhaps she was a woman from a big family. When she handed over the stick, her 2 fingers carefully clamped the end of the stick. She was a bit regretful that he couldn't take advantage of the opportunity to take advantage of the old Taoist priest. He lowered his head to look at the stick in his hand and then solemnly looked up at her. He then picked up the teapot and drank a mouthful of tea to moisten his throat. He then slowly said, "This is the 28th stick." The young lady was uneasy and waited for him to continue. The old Taoist priest smiled. "Young lady, don't worry. Although it's not the best stick, it's still a good stick. It means that if you can't get the person you like this time, you must remember not to be discouraged. There will always be a day when you see the light at the end of the tunnel." The young lady, whose forehead was already sweating, was relieved. She was full of smiles. Her rare, graceful bearing of a Bailiang almost made the old Taoist priest infatuated. The young lady let the maid beside her take out an extra 100 copper coins. She happily turned around and left. The next guest was a young man with a sturdy body. He grabbed the stick pot and shook it vigorously. After a stick fell out, he grabbed it and slammed it on the table. "Look at what stick it is." The old Taoist priest's eyelids trembled. He picked up the stick with a straight face and concisely said, "Fei Chongfeng's endless yearning place. The 16th stick, the worst stick." The young man was stunned and angrily said, "Even the 28th stick of that little girl is a good draw. Why is my 16th stick a dog's fart bad stick? Old bastard, are you looking for trouble?" The old Taoist priest turned a deaf ear to this and slightly shifted his gaze. Next, the young man angrily said, "I'm not paying." The old Taoist priest was indeed an otherworldly immortal. He indifferently said, "There's a rule when I interpret sticks for people. No matter the stick is good or bad, if you believe it, you will get 100 copper coins. If you don't believe it, you can leave. I will not make it difficult for you." The young man was obviously shocked. His momentum suddenly decreased, and he asked, "Who is this Fei Chongfeng?" The old Taoist priest coldly said, "He is a famous Taoist immortal Jinren of the Dafeng dynasty." The old Taoist priest paused for a moment. With a solemn face, he said in a low voice, "This Master Fei is also a good friend of my sex founder." In the end, they even agreed to ascend together. There is nothing more grand in the world than this. The young man was speechless. In the end, he obediently took out 100 copper coins and gently placed it on the table. He left with a heavy heart. After this small storm, the old Taoist priest had the demeanor of a Taoist master. Even the tattered Taoist robe on his body seemed to have a sense of vicissitudes. Su Fengyin watched from the beginning to the end. He was quite impressed. The old liar did have some Taoist skills. The more he watched, the more interested he became. The following words from the customers were relatively ordinary. There was neither extremely bad nor extremely auspicious. However, what was interesting was that many of the words were taken from Wang Chudong's The First Snow. For example, a young hero asked for a Qingchuan saber is like the soil, and the following sentence, "I can't bear to look at the green hair of the lady," but met with the yellow shirt of the guest. These were all popular phrases taken from The First Snow. It was said that in the early years, a few noble concubines in the Liang Palace loved The First Snow very much. Not only that, even the names of the 3 songs of the Beimang Chess and Sword Music School were chosen from the original songs of the first snow. It was conceivable that if Wang Chudong were to appear in the Central Plains, he would be a first-class guest. Every time he heard a familiar phrase, Su Fengyan squinted his eyes and smiled. In the end, he looked a little absent-minded. He remembered that there was a woman who was married thousands of miles away. She was infatuated with this book. Su Fengyan sighed. When he was about to stand up, he suddenly squatted back down. Chapter 1885. 2 familiar faces appeared among the endless stream of people at the stall next door. The young master of Yuyan Mountain Villa, Zhang Chunlin, carried a sword box on his back. There were 4 swords hidden in it, which should be the fledgling vine, monk hut, frost blade, and rootless heavenly water. Su Fengyan was at Yuyan Mountain Villa when he first met the white-clothed immortals of the Guanyin sect. Among them was the charcoal girl. Later in the western regions, Su Fengyan and Zhang Chunlin met by chance. Unexpectedly, this young man always treated him as a benefactor. Even the sword he cast from the Water Dragon Song Sword Furnace was named Frostblade. Presumably, this kind of rebellious behavior of a swordsman who did not respect the way of the sword would provoke criticism in Jianghu. Fortunately, Yuyan Mountain Villa was like the sun in the sky. The Dragon Rock Sword Furnace and the Water Dragon Song Sword Furnace had successively cast more than 10 famous swords, making Yuyan Mountain Villa one of the top 10 gangs in Liang. Its ranking was even higher than Jiangnan's Drum Platform and Beiliang's Fish Dragon Gang. The other was the young master of the Quicksnow Villa by the Spring Lake, Yuqi Nurchuan. Unlike Zhang Chunlin, who traveled alone in Jianghu, she was accompanied by a middle-aged man in plain clothes, but with a dignified air. Presumably, he was her father, Yuqi Liangfu. Su Fengyan looked at Zhang Chunlin and Yuqi Nurchuan, who were walking together, and could not help but smile. They were a good match for each other. Zhang Chunlin had no intention of drawing lots. He just stood by Yuqi Nurchuan's side, looking at her carefully and playfully drawing lots. His gaze was gentle. The old Taoist skill in judging dishes had already been perfected to the point of perfection, as long as it was not the kind of undeniably bad lot. In fact, when encountering a customer whom he considered to be rich and powerful, he would be incomparably adept at describing a plain lot as a good lot. In the final analysis, he had recently taken advantage of the east wind brought by the Wulin World's grand event to set up a stall on Mount Wudong to interpret the lot. It was only a one-off business. Why would he care about returning customers? Therefore, when a young lady, who looked like she came from a good family, handed over the bamboo stick and looked at the content clearly, the old Taoist was not stingy with his smile and said happily, "Miss, this is a rare lucky stick. All the heroes in the hall are here. I wonder who will be the top scholar." There was also an allusion to this story. It was said that after the previous emperor unified the Central Plains, he opened the imperial examinations for the first time. When he saw all the outstanding talents standing in the main hall, he was very pleased and thus asked this question. "The meaning of this lot is very good. I believe that you don't lack good pursuers around you." Haha. Actually, I don't need to say anything more. I just want to say one more thing. It's better if you don't get blinded by your choices and waste your time. Yuqi Liangfu smiled faintly. As a well-deserved authority in Jianghu, he naturally could see the weight of this old Taoist. But no matter what, his daughter was able to draw a good lot. Naturally, he had no reason to be unhappy. Yuqi Juchuan turned his head and said excitedly to his father, "Father, didn't I say that the divination here is very effective?" Yuqi Liangfu's eyes were filled with affection as he smiled and said, "It's very effective." She thought of something and turned her head to ask tentatively, "Taoist priest, can I take this lot?" The old Taoist was in a difficult position, but when he caught a glimpse of the lady's father's action of taking out money, he immediately smiled and said, "It's fine if you take it. I'll just write another one on the spot. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal." Yuqi Juchuan received the bamboo stick with both hands and winked at her father. Yuqi Liangfu smiled helplessly and simply placed the entire money pouch on the table. She raised the bamboo stick high above her head. Under the warm autumn sun, she raised her head, focused, and happy. On the side, Zhang Chunlin also became happy. Because the two villas were both among the top upstarts in Liang Jianghu, and unlike the Wu family sword tomb and Dongyue sword pool, or the Dragon Tiger Mountain and Wudong Mountain, the Swift Snow Mountain Villa and Yiyan Mountain Villa had the potential to be natural allies. In fact, Yuqi Liangfu had taken a fancy to Zhang Chunlin, who had a gentle temperament, the first time the young man paid a visit, and he had long regarded him as a good son-in-law. Especially Zhang Chunlin, who had suddenly become rich. After entering Jianghu, he did not have the bad habit of calling his friends to wander the Jianghu. As the only heir of the huge Yuyan Mountain Villa, he actually came alone with only the sword box, which made the shrewd Yuqi Liangfu very much approve of him. Moreover, the young man's parents, the virtuous couple of Yuyan Mountain Villa, had always thought that they were kind and had a good reputation in Jianghu. But deep down, Yuqi Liangfu also had some considerations that he could not tell others. Now that the northern sect of Liang Mountain Villa had withered, and Jianghu's secret was that Zhang Chunlin's mother came from the Guanyin sect of the South Sea, and was once a talented qi cultivator with a bright future. Yuqi Liangfu had to think deeper and further. If the Swift Snow Mountain Villa and Yuyan Mountain Villa were successful in their marriage, on the surface it seemed that the latter was climbing up the social ladder, but in the future it could be the foresight of the Swift Snow Mountain Villa. Of course, if his daughter was not fated to be with Zhang Chunlin, Yuqi Liangfu would not resort to such shady business. After all, to Yuqi Liangfu, who was ambitious and ruthless, but had never remarried after losing his wife, his daughter's happiness was also very important. It was even more important than Zhuangzi's position in Jianghu. Yuqi Liangfu had never denied that for the sake of Snow Mountain Manor's rise, he had spared no effort and no lack of cold-blooded methods. However, this middle-aged man had always insisted that the reason he had put so much effort into Jianghu was so that his only daughter would not have to put so much effort into Jianghu in the future. Yuqi Juquan, who had gotten what he wanted, was leaving shoulder to shoulder with Yuqi Liangfu. He suddenly leaned over and asked in a low voice, "Father, how many more years do you plan on delaying Aunt Lu? Aunt Lu is not young anymore." Yuqi Liangfu, who had not exposed his secret, flushed red. Although that woman had never appeared in the manor, everyone in the manor had more or less heard of her. However, Yuqi Liangfu had never thought that someone would have the guts to let his daughter hear about it. Yuqi Liangfu narrowed his eyes slightly, his thoughts turning rapidly. If he found out who had leaked the heavenly secrets, then don't blame him for throwing that person into the spring deity lake to feed the fishes. Yuqi Juquan seemed to be completely unaware of her father's unsightly expression and gloomy thoughts. She said indifferently, "Then just marry her. It's not a big deal." "Father, you're so secretive. You really don't have the slightest bit of heroic spirit. Be careful that I don't worship you in the future." Yuqi Liangfu's expression returned to normal, and he softly grunted. She inexplicably added, "You're not allowed to get angry." Yuqi Liangfu smiled and said, "I know." Just as Zhang Chunlin followed the father and daughter and turned around, he caught sight of a person from the corner of his eye. His eyes immediately widened, as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. However, when he saw that person raise a finger and shushed him, Zhang Chunlin forced himself to remain calm and continued to walk forward with a calm expression. Su Fingyan, who had finished eating the Wudong's spring sesame seed cake, stopped Zhang Chunlin from speaking, then clapped his hands and prepared to leave. After the little clay figurine searched the sky with its sword to no avail, it returned home in a huff. It reckoned that its anger had more or less subsided by now. At the very least, it wouldn't take out its sword and hack people as soon as it saw them. As for whether it would be a few words of abuse or a closed door, with Su Fingyan's thick skin, it wouldn't be a big deal. However, at this moment, the dense stream of people between LV Zuding and the elephant cleansing pool suddenly separated, just like Wudong's old sect leader Wang Zhongluo's one finger splitting the river. Chapter 1886. Su Fingyan rubbed his forehead and stood up, but he didn't leave. It was the Mount Hui woman who had walked out of LV Zuding. Even though she wasn't wearing her world-shaking purple robes today, A certain Jianghu person with good status still recognized her first. Then, she was like a flood dragon entering an ant's nest. The people in front of her couldn't help but move to the side. Yuchi Liangfu stopped and cupped his fist with a smile. Alliance Master Xianyuan. Xianyuan Qingfeng turned a deaf ear to him and walked past the three of them. Yuchi Liangfu also seemed to be used to this. He stood in place and waited for the owner of the moonless tower to walk a dozen steps away before continuing to walk forward. Yuchi Nyochiwan couldn't help but turn his head and glance at her. That legendary woman who had made countless heroes of Liang River submit to her purple robes. Of the 13 champions of auspicious talisman, she alone held 3 of them. It was rumored that she had once rejected the current emperor, and even rumored that she comprehended immortality by watching the snow for a night on the Bull Mound. Yuchi Nyochiwan murmured in a small voice, "She really is a beautiful woman, but cold as ice." Yuchi Liangfu hurriedly glared at his daughter. Xianyuan Qingfeng walked straight to the old Taoist stall. The latter swallowed his saliva and didn't know what to do. She looked down at the silent elder Immortal Wu and calmly asked, "Is it effective?" The old Taoist wasn't blind, nor was he deaf. After learning of this beautiful woman's unique identity, he didn't have the guts to have any devious thoughts, even if he were to suddenly become a true Taoist master. Xianyuan Zi's mood swings in the Great Snow Plateau were known to almost everyone in Liang. She dared to obstruct Wang Xianji of Martial Emperor City on Guangling River. She dared to obstruct the king of Beiliang, Su Fengyan, outside Great Peace City. She dared to obstruct Chao Changqing outside Great Peace City. She dared to act so crazily because she was Xianyuan Zi. No matter how big Liang River was, how many people could be so unreasonable and crazy? Thus, when the old Taoist heard her question, he braced himself and replied with trepidation, reporting to Alliance Master, "It's not very effective." He really didn't dare to boast. If he didn't meet her requirements, wouldn't he be digging his own grave with a hoe? Xianyuan Qingfeng's lips twitched. Oh, the old Taoist knew that things were not going well. He quickly said, "It works most of the time, but I can't guarantee that it will work every time." Su Fengyan, who was watching from the side, admired the old Taoist's quick-wittedness from the bottom of his heart. In any kind of swindling in the world, the most important thing was to be able to make the words sound. Only then could one be in an invincible position. Ordinary people couldn't do technical work. Unfortunately, he was embarrassingly short of money and had no way to reward her. Xianyuan Qingfeng's face was expressionless. He reached out and grabbed the bamboo tube that contained 108 marriage sticks. He raised his arm slightly and shook it gently. Her wrist, which was as smooth as jade, slowly twisted. Every time the pot turned, the old Taoist's heart would tremble. In the past, it meant that he would receive 100 copper coins, but now it was very likely that he would lose his life. Finally, a stick jumped out of the bamboo tube. After she twisted it, she slowly said, "2 lives in 1 body, a lonely shadow. What number is it?" The old Taoist even had the thought of dying. Did this lousy stick still need him to interpret it? The old Taoist almost collapsed on the bench. He said with a trembling voice, "It's the 84th lot." On the verge of death, the old Taoist suddenly had an idea. He gathered his courage and said loudly, "Alliance Master, this is exactly the kind of situation where it doesn't work." Many kind-hearted pilgrims nearby broke out in cold sweat for the old Taoist. Xianyuan Qingfeng threw the stick back into the bamboo tube and continued to turn it. The old Taoist stared at the bamboo tube without blinking. He muttered in his heart, praying to all the immortals, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas. Not to mention the Jinwu Great Emperor in Wudong. He didn't even forget the local temple in his hometown in River Province. However, when the woman said the second lot, the old Taoist heart was completely dead. Hoping for a fish from a tree, but in the end, you won't get it. She still asked, "What number is it?" The sweat-drenched old Taoist sighed softly and said weakly, "It's the 54th lot." She held the stick in one hand and the tube in the other. She didn't throw the stick back into the tube, nor did she say anything. She narrowed her long and narrow red phoenix eyes. The old Taoist lowered his head and said dejectedly, "My lot isn't working." The old Taoist didn't even dare to call himself a poor Taoist anymore. She secretly glanced elsewhere. After a moment of hesitation, she began to shake the bamboo tube for the third time. A bamboo stick gently fell on the table. The old Taoist closed his eyes and pretended to be dead. He heard the cold voice above his head. Divination determines doubts. If you don't doubt, how can you divine? The old Taoist, who was already on the verge of collapse, was in a daze. He didn't come back to his senses for a moment. Someone replied on his behalf, "The 11th lot, the middling lot." The old Taoist, who finally came back to his senses, was ecstatic. He said in a heart-wrenching voice, "Alliance Master, it's a neutral lot. It's really a neutral lot." The old Taoist cried tears of joy. The world was like this. After going through the gates of hell and returning to the world of the living, he believed that as long as he had a mouthful of cold water to drink and a cold steamed bun to eat, it would already be a great blessing. She sank into contemplation. After smiling, she unexpectedly shook the bamboo tube for the 4th time. Everyone said that things shouldn't be done more than 3 times, but she still shook the bamboo tube for the 4th time. This time, the old Taoist, who had probably resigned himself to fate, somehow found the energy to look left and right, trying to find the benefactor who previously helped him explain the lot. However, it was difficult to find in the vast sea of people. This time, after Xianyuan Qingfeng drew the bamboo stick, he didn't report the contents of the lot. Instead, he looked at it and handed it to the old Taoist. Like the most ordinary person who asked for a lot, he asked, "What's the meaning?" The old Taoist trembled as he took the bamboo stick. He answered loudly, "Winning lot, winning lot, winning lot." The old Taoist only repeatedly signed the 2 words in a loud voice. She didn't get angry. After waiting for the old Taoist to calm down a bit, she continued to ask, "What's the meaning?" The old Taoist raised his sleeve to wipe his tears. He stood up with difficulty, held the lot with both hands and bowed. With a terrified expression, he said, "Reporting to Alliance Master, this lot is the 96th lot. Perhaps 10 years, perhaps 7 or 8 years, perhaps 5 or 6 years, perhaps 3 or 4 years. This lot says that when it comes to marriage, haste makes waste. You must wait patiently." The old Taoist didn't forget to say, "It's not necessarily accurate. It's not necessarily effective." Xianyuan Qingfeng neither agreed nor disagreed. He reached out his hand. The old Taoist hurriedly handed the bamboo stick to this terrifying woman who was like the king of hell. Then, she said something that shocked everyone. "Your divination is quite effective. Very good." She lowered her head and put down the bamboo tube. She took out 3 lots in succession. 2 of them instantly turned into fine powder after leaving the bamboo tube. As a result, she only left 2 lots. She raised her head and looked at the old Taoist who looked like he had just climbed out of an elephant washing pool. After thinking for a bit, she said, "You solved the 4th lot for me." The old Taoist couldn't help but widen his eyes. His lips were dry. He heard her slowly say, 100 taels of gold, 1 Taoist secret manual, 1 house in Beiliang's Lingzhou, and 1 guest position on Mount Hui. You can choose any one of them. The old Taoist cried tears of joy again. With tears streaming down his old face, he said, "I want to go to Mount Hui. I want to be a guest in Great Snow Plains." Xianyuan Qingfeng turned and left with a cold expression. She took the 2 marriage lots with her. Chapter 1887. The old Taoist stood there and muttered to himself. No one knew what he was mumbling to himself. Suddenly, he kicked the bench away and laughed out loud. "Why would I want to be a Taoist priest? From today onwards, I'm a guest of Mount Hui, a first-class one." It was obvious that even if the old Taoist continued to open his stall, no one would be interested in asking for divination. Suddenly, a teasing voice sounded in the old Taoist's ears. "Old immortal, this is Mount Wudong, which is full of Taoists. It's not appropriate for you to speak like that." The old Taoist, who was full of pride, frowned and turned his head to look. He saw a young man who he thought could barely be called a handsome young master. The old Taoist snorted coldly. So what if I said it? This poor Taoist is a first-class guest of Mount Hui. Even if this poor Taoist met old Immortal Chun and old Taoist Yu, if this poor Taoist met them now, I would probably be able to ask for a cup of tea. The young man gave him a thumbs up and praised, "Amazing." The woman beside the young man laughed angrily. "Old Wu, it was this young man who spoke up for you. Are you blind?" The old Taoist was stunned. He immediately changed his expression and smiled. "This poor Taoist has been rude. Please don't blame me." The old Taoist strode towards the woman's stall. His Taoist robe's sleeves swayed violently. He had the style of a dragon and tiger. "Sister Han, come. Help me and this young man get 2 pieces of Wudong's spring sesame seed cake. Remember to spread the cake bigger. I don't lack money. Besides, I'm not a stingy person." The woman shook her head helplessly. She was nimble and skillful. Soon, she handed the 2 a piece of Wudong's spring sesame seed cake. It was steaming hot and fragrant. When the old Taoist took the sesame seed cake, he wanted to touch the woman's hand. The latter was faster than him and did not let the old Taoist have his way. The old Taoist took a big bite of the spring sesame seed cake and said with a smile, "Sister Han, why are you still doing such tiring work? You won't be able to earn much money even if you wake up early and work late at night. Why don't you accompany me to Mount Hui?" The woman rolled her eyes. "Why are we going to Zhongyuan?" The old Taoist chuckled and said, "Sister, don't you know what I'm thinking?" The woman was stunned at first. Then she flew into a rage out of humiliation. Scram! The old Taoist did not give up and said, "Sister, didn't your man die a long time ago outside the Liangzhou Pass? So what if he remarried after so many years? Your family is so pitiful. It's good to have a reliable man to take care of you. What's more, didn't you ask Big Brother to read the lot before?" The woman, who was already extremely angry, turned pale. She took a few steps forward, grabbed the spring sesame seed cake in the old Taoist's hand, and threw it to the ground. Scram! No matter who I sell spring sesame seed cakes to, I won't sell them to a disgusting person like you. No matter how much money you give me, I'll still find it dirty. The old Taoist wasn't angry, but he said regretfully, Sister Han, you're a good woman, but it's a pity you don't have a life to enjoy life. Forget it. Let's just assume that we're not fated to be together." The woman no longer paid any attention to this disrespectful old man. The old Taoist sighed to himself, then turned to the young man and said with a smile, "All right, this poor Taoist can only go to the Central Plains to enjoy life. The green mountains never change, and the green water flows forever. Young master, if you want to go to Mount Hui in the future, just mention this poor Taoist name." The young man smiled and said, "All right." The old Taoist left in a carefree manner. The young man asked, "Old Taoist, you don't even want the stall anymore?" The old Taoist didn't turn around. He waved his hand and said in a seemingly magnanimous manner, "Why would I want those worthless things? If you like them, they're yours." After the old Taoist had walked far away, the woman said to the young man softly, "He didn't even tell young master what his name is, and even mentioned his name. I've seen thick-skinned people, but I've never seen someone as thick-skinned as him. Fortunately, I heard that this old man is from Hezhou. Otherwise, he'd really embarrass our Bailiang." Su Fengyan smiled and asked, "From your accent, you're from Bailiang's Lingzhou?" The woman had a strange look in her eyes. After a while, she said, "Young master, why are you asking this?" Su Fengyan, who was swallowing Wudong's spring sesame seed cake, almost choked. The woman covered her mouth and laughed. "Look at how scared you are. I'm just teasing you." Su Fengyan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He ate the spring sesame seed cake as he walked to the stall next door. He lifted the bench and turned his head with a smile. "Sister-in-law, the guy who treated me to spring sesame seed cake ran away. Why don't I help you solve the lot and treat it as money for the cake?" After the commotion caused by the woman with a frightening aura, the business of the woman's stall had become cold and cheerless. She sat on the bench and gently patted her waist. She looked at the young man with a gentle smile and asked suspiciously, "You know how to solve the lot?" Su Fengyan nodded and said, "It's my old profession." The woman shook her head and smiled. "Young master, you're not as good as that old man. I won't fall for it. Don't worry, I'll treat you. Su Fengyan asked curiously, Sister-in-law, why did you come from Lingzhou to Wudong Mountain to set up a stall? The woman said calmly, My family is here. I came to the mountain to burn incense and pray for blessings a while ago. After seeing the scene here, I thought that I know how to do these things. Since I have nothing to do, I thought that I could earn more money by setting up a stall. Su Fengyan smiled and asked, I'm guessing that your children are all studying in Mingguan school? That's right, in Beiliang, books are expensive. They eat money the most. The woman stopped talking and stared at Su Fengyan in a daze. Su Fengyan, who was feeling aggrieved, said helplessly, Sister-in-law, I'm really not that kind of person. The woman couldn't help but laugh. You really can't take a joke. You're not like the men in Beiliang. Su Fengyan pretended to be angry. Sister-in-law, don't scold me. The woman waved her hand and brought over a small stool and a bowl of calming soup. She sat opposite Su Fengyan and smiled. The biscuits are for you. This bowl of calming soup can be considered the payment for clearing the sign. Sister-in-law, you can't read, so you can't lie to me. Su Fengyan finished eating the spring sesame seed cake and leaned over to take a big gulp of the calming soup. How can I? The woman held the bamboo tube with both hands. Her eyes were sincere. Su Fengyan sat upright and still. He smiled and didn't say anything. After placing the sign on the table, she used both her thumb and index finger to hold the head and tail. Since she couldn't read, she didn't need to take the extra step of looking at it carefully. She also used both hands to hand the sign to Su Fengyan. That silent solemnity seemed to be handing over her life. The common people who had no fate with history always believed that there was a deity above their heads. They would be willing to believe that there would be blessings in the next life. Only then would they painstakingly climb high and burn incense to pray. Su Fengyan took the bamboo stick. After reading the sign, the corners of his mouth curled up. He said softly, Forgetting my feet, it's appropriate to wear. Forgetting my waist, it's appropriate to wear. The 72nd lot, the top lot. The woman couldn't read, but she could roughly understand the contents of the sign. As for the two words top lot, it was concise and to the point. There was no need to doubt it. She smiled in relief. Su Fengyan took back the bamboo stick and put it back into the bamboo tube. He drank a mouthful of calming soup and smiled. Sister-in-law is a good person. Good things will happen to you. Her smile was tranquil. Chapter 1888. After that, the two of them chatted casually. Most of the time, she talked while he listened. She talked about the scenery of Lingzhou in her eyes. Of course, most of it was about the education of the two children in her family. She said that the older children were not bad and were not so naughty. Although no one had ever heard the teachers praise them, and most likely they would not be able to pass the county exam. Even passing the county exam and becoming a scholar would not be easy. However, every time she saw the child reading under the light and shaking his head like a scholar, she would feel very happy for no reason. At the same time, the younger child gave her a headache. He would rather work in the fields than study at a private school. At such a young age, he wanted to go to war and kill barbarians. In the end, she said that she did not know how the other places in Beiliang were doing. In the past 2 years, at least the children in Lingzhou could get cheap books from private schools. It was so cheap that even a poor family like her felt it was cheap. This was because there was an official surnamed Su in Lingzhou. It was his idea. That official seemed to have said that Beiliang had fewer people, but there could be more scholars. She did not know if it was true or not. In any case, those books were indeed much cheaper than 5 or 6 years ago. That was why she said that official surnamed Su was a good person. Unfortunately, she heard that he left Lingzhou to become an official in Liangzhou. Su Fengyan smiled gently and looked into the distance. He said softly, Zhu Zi is good in everything, but his alcohol tolerance is bad. The woman did not understand and did not ask further. There was business at her stall. The woman asked, Sir, can I have that lot back? Su Fengyan smiled. Then I will have to look for it. Sister-in-law, you go ahead. I will send it back to you when I find it. She nodded. After she stood up, the woman suddenly blushed. Sir, you can call me aunt. Don't call me sister-in-law. Su Fengnian was confused. The woman snorted and went to the stall next door. Su Fengnian shook his head. He did not understand. He held the bamboo tube upside down and poured out the bamboo lots. After Yuqi Yuquan and Xianyuan Qingfeng, 5 of the original 108 lots were missing. He found the bamboo stick that the woman had shaken out and stood up to deliver it. She realized that this young man, who was so idle that he had become a fortune teller, didn't seem to understand what she meant. Thus, she felt a little embarrassed. She glanced at the bamboo stick and carefully put it away. She raised her head and asked, "Which stick? Don't lie to me." Su Fengnian shook his head and said seriously, "I'm not lying." She smiled and said, Go. Sister-in-law won't delay you from swindling money." Somewhat depressed, Su Fengnian sat back down at the table and resumed his old business. He was familiar with the business and began to openly solicit business. It was just that the old Taoist with the goatee had left behind such a mess. Good news didn't leave the house, but bad news traveled 1,000 miles. In addition, the nearby stalls believed that Su Fengnian was a money-grubbing swindler. Moreover, he was young and didn't wear a frightening Taoist robe. Naturally, he gave people the impression that he didn't know how to do things properly. Groups of pilgrims and tourists passed by, clearly not interested in stopping to draw lots. It was rare that 2 or 3 young women wanted to say something and went forward to draw lots. In the end, they were all tactfully refused by their family elders or men of the same age. Su Fengnian could only drink the calming soup in small mouthfuls. He was really bored to death. Su Fengnian gradually changed from sitting upright and still to sitting with one leg crossed over the other, and then to lying on the table and shaking the bamboo tube. In the end, he simply shook out bamboo lots himself. He didn't even look at the lot and casually threw it back. The woman next door wiped the sweat from her forehead and teased, "How can you do business like this? The most difficult thing in the world is to take money from other people's pockets. Young master, you're really good." Su Fengnian sighed and said, "Do you really want me to borrow a Taoist robe from Wudong?" The woman was puzzled and said, "Young master doesn't seem like someone who lacks money. Do you really care about that little bit of money?" Su Fengnian subconsciously glanced in the direction of the thatched cottage and said with a gentle smile, "My wife is the most useless. She only likes to collect copper coins. No matter how big or small they are, she doesn't dislike them. She's just like a miser." The woman was overjoyed. "It's a good thing your wife isn't here." Then she advised, "Women are all like this. Young master, you should be more open-minded." Su Fengnian deeply agreed. Swallows eat mud. Many little drops make a mickle. This is the truth. The woman let out a long breath and raised her hand to stroke the hair on her temples that was soaked in sweat. "Sister-in-law will go back first." Su Fengnian asked curiously, "Going down the mountain so early? There's so many things scattered here and there. Can you move them?" She pointed to a young woman who was slowly walking over from the mountain road outside LV Zuding and said with a smile, "She's my niece. She sells rouge and face powder at Yuqingguan, which is higher up the mountain. I reckon she's already sold out. In the past, she would come even later to help me. Today, I'll be lazy and go down the mountain early." Su Fengnian stood up and said, "If we go down the mountain from here, there's still a lot of mountain roads to go. Sister-in-law, I'll help you pick a path." She shook her head and said firmly, "No need. I have a lot of things here, but they're not heavy." Su Fengnian joked, "Sister-in-law, just take it that I have bad intentions. In any case, I'll send you to the memorial arch at the foot of the mountain, okay?" The woman lightly spat and glared at Su Fengnian, who spoke without thinking. She laughed and said, "You're not afraid of being disliked, but I'm afraid. My niece is very shrewish. What could it be that you've taken a fancy to her? Then sister-in-law can be a matchmaker." Su Fengnian glanced at the young woman who was getting closer and closer. He gasped. Her waist was not a willow tree, but a big locust tree. He smiled bitterly and said, "Forget it." She took the opportunity when her young niece was not close to the 2 neighboring stalls. She faced Su Fengnian and asked softly, "What are you thinking about?" At this moment, she saw that the young man was handsome. His eyes were especially clear. They were so clean that they were like the elephant washing pool she saw when she first climbed Wudong Mountain. Su Fingyin said, "I've been outside Liangzhou Pass to Huayang Pass and to Hota City." She said calmly, "I see." Su Fingyin grinned. She asked for no reason, "Do you think the Beimang barbarians will fight all the way here? Will they fight all the way to Lingzhou?" Su Fingyin's expression was firm and said, "As long as there is one person left in the Bailiang cavalry, then the Beimang barbarians' horses will not be able to step on the grass and trees inside Bailiang Pass." She nodded and then smiled. "You talk so big. You speak as if you're a high-ranking official." Su Fingyin laughed and said, "I'm not a high-ranking official." She said unhappily, "Do you even need to say that?" Su Fingyin was still unwilling to give up. "Sister-in-law, you really don't need to help carry the burden?" Her following words made Su Fingyin dumbstruck. "Don't call me sister-in-law. I've seen many Jianghu people these days. I heard them say that when our young prince roamed the Jianghu, he had a catchphrase. It was something like, 'Nothing is better than dumplings. Nothing is better than sister-in-law.'" Su Fingyin wiped his face with his hand. He was devastated. "Did no one mention the phrase, 'Return my ass,' I said at the top of the snowfield to you? Isn't it more arrogant than this catchphrase? Besides, this phrase was also heard by a sloppy wooden sword ranger somewhere, and then he insisted on teaching me." The woman's eyes were mischievous. She didn't say anything else and turned around to pack up. Su Fingyin looked at her back and finally didn't dare to call her sister-in-law. He only asked, "Did the government embezzle or delay the payment of the pension?" She paused and didn't turn around. She shook her head and said, "No. His old sergeant often sent us extra money a few years ago. It wasn't last year." She paused and then said softly, "I only heard this spring that the old sergeant died in Hota City." She didn't turn her head after that. She knew that the first marriage lot she shook wasn't the bamboo lot in her arms. She didn't know how to read, but she remembered the number of words on the lot. But this wasn't an important matter. Commoners, no matter how hard their lives were, as long as there was hope, they could grit their teeth and live. Her hope was the 2 children. As for whether the lot she shook today was good or bad, it didn't matter. In the end, before she and her niece took the burden and left, she inadvertently saw the young man who always gave people the impression that he was clean. He sat behind the table with his back straight and his hands clenched in his lap. He was quiet. He didn't look like a young man, but more like an old man. The spring breeze was far away, and he could only silently bask in the warm autumn sun. Chapter 1889. In front of the brand new thatched cottage in the quiet part of Big Lotus Peak, it had never been so lively. The white-robed monk was tall, but he gave people the feeling that he was in perfect harmony. The string of beads on his chest was dim in color, obviously different from the precious Buddhist beads of the many great temples in the Central Plains. Since returning from a long journey to the west, he didn't have any beads, only a string of peachwood Buddhist beads. This string of beads was a token of love between him and his wife. After she gave it to him, she actually regretted it, because later she heard that peach wood was a material highly respected by Taoists. It could ward off evil spirits, but in Buddhism, peachwood Buddhist beads weren't worth mentioning. But the white-robed monk Li Xiaoxin never left this string of Buddhist beads, except for hanging it on the wall before he went to sleep. In Buddhism, there was a saying, "Be mindful of your heart and mind." His common name was Li Xiaoxin. Therefore, when he entered the capital in white, the old emperor of Liang gave him a string of priceless 7 treasures beads, which he casually threw into a chest. After having a daughter, Li Xiaoxin, his wife picked a dozen beads every now and then, weaved them into a ring, and put it on her daughter's head. The little girl, who liked to run around the 2 Zen temples, didn't know the value of these beads and would soon lose them. Fortunately, no one in this family of 3 would feel bad. At this time, opposite the white-robed monk sat 3 Taoist priests from the 2 Taoist ancestral courts. Baiyu, who had just been promoted to governor of Liangzhou, Xianxia, who was also a Taoist priest of Mount Longhu, and Han Gui, who was from Qingshan Taoist Temple of Wudong. Not far away, Li Xiaoxin, Wu Nanbei, the only disciple of the current Wudong leader Li Yufu, and Han Gui's disciple Xianxia were squatting together, listening to Li Xiaoxin talk about her soul-stirring Jianghu experiences. The white-robed monk's wife had already taken a nap. When she learned that the 3 Taoist priests had come, she leaned against the door and said, "There are so many of them. They don't come with good intentions." The white-robed monk smiled and said, "It's just a quarrel. Don't worry." She was still worried and said, "Then I won't prepare tea. Let them be thirsty, but you can find an excuse to come in and drink water." "Okay, won't that be rude?" "Not at all. By the way, if you really can't beat them in an argument, remember to hit them, but not their faces when you hit them. Otherwise, you'll be left with nothing to say." "Got it." "What? You can't beat them? Then forget it. Let's have a peaceful chat." "Huh. When we're outside, harmony breeds wealth. We can beat them. Oh, remember not to hit them too hard. Our daughter still wants to play on the mountain for a few more days." "I know. Taoist priest, Taoist priest, Taoist temple, Taoist." He asked, "Is Headmaster Li in closed-door cultivation at Small Lotus Peak?" "Of the Taoist priest." N. Tao. He gently stroked the string of mahogany Buddhist beads and said indifferently, "The earth sinks in the southeast, and the 4 desecrations flow to the Sun position." Han Gui wore a plain Taoist robe and a Dongshin scarf. He looked a little sad. Bai Yu, who had hurt his eyes from reading, narrowed his eyes out of habit, as if he had nothing to do with it. Xianxia looked up at the rolling sea of clouds at the top of Big Lotus Peak. The white-clothed monk asked with a smile, "If you can't do what you want in life, even if you're 100 years old, you'll still die." Did Chao Zhangqing say it after he entered the great Chu chessboard and waited for the imperial edict? Bai Yu shook his head. Chao Changqing's teacher, Li Mi, said that Chao Changqing was able to change from the scholarly sage to the tyrannical way. I'm afraid this sentence was the finishing touch. The white-clothed monk gently twirled his Buddhist beads. If the 3 things of a good flower, a full moon, and a long life are the happiest wishes of mortals, then the pursuit of your Taoists is to have a smooth mind, right? Bai Yu rubbed his eyes lazily and asked with a smile, "What? Are you going to quarrel? But there's not even a cup of tea here." The white-clothed monk said softly, "If my wife doesn't let me prepare tea, I won't dare to make a decision." As for quarreling, the white-clothed monk looked over everyone's heads and looked not far away. He said loudly, "Disciple, come. Talk to our Mr. White Lotus about Buddhism." Unexpectedly, the young monk slightly raised his little bald head and said reluctantly, "Master, if it wasn't for Li Zi not letting me go, I would have gone to the Clear Jade Temple to buy rouge from Master's wife." Master's wife said that there's a young woman as beautiful as a flower there. These days, she's been selling Shu sunflower rouge at a very low price. It said that there's also Wu Yin Lu Fong in Jiangnan. The white-clothed monk glared at him. "You still have a nerve to talk about Wu Yin Lu? You dare to sell a small box the size of fingernail for 5 taels of silver. If you didn't mention it to Master's wife, she wouldn't have been thinking about it the whole night. Last night, she was talking about Wu Yin Lu in her sleep." The young monk said confidently, "I just think that the rouge is really good. Those at the escape summer town at the foot of the mountain are cheap, but the fragrance is too pungent. Although the box is bigger, it's not like Master didn't see it yesterday. Master thought that it wasn't expensive, so Master's wife put so much on her face. When she lowered her head while eating, the rouge would fall in her bowl. It was so scary. Master, you were obviously scared out of your wits, but you still said to Master's wife something like such a scene is really rare in the world." Then Master's wife grinned and more rouge fell. The white-clothed monk coughed a few times. Bai Yu felt that if this middle-aged monk of the 2 Zen temples hadn't been absent during the battle between Buddhism and Taoism at Mount Longhu more than 10 years ago, he probably wouldn't have been able to turn the tide. The head of the Green Mountain Temple, Han Gui, was looking down. He was like an old monk in meditation. Xianxia seemed to be secretly rubbing the space between her eyebrows. Suddenly, 2 voices sounded from inside and outside the house at the same time. They were full of surprise. Mai and Yanzi from the tobacco workshop? Inside the house, it was naturally the white-clothed monk's wife. Outside the house, it was Xianxia. The latter got up abruptly and ran into the house, shouting, "Mother, Father recently hid 4 or 5 taels of silver under the box of scriptures. When he was hiding the money, I secretly saw it. Father told me to keep my mouth shut. But who am I? I'm Mother's daughter." Suddenly, there was a commotion in the thatched house. There was a rush of people rummaging through boxes and cabinets. The white-clothed monk looked up at the sky with a sorrowful expression. If outsiders didn't know the reason, they would definitely marvel at the solemn appearance of the Buddha, who pitied the suffering of the world. When the 2 women, one older and one younger, walked out of the thatched house, the white-clothed monk rubbed his bald head and stood up. He said with concern, "It's so sunny. Do you want an umbrella?" His wife thought for a moment and waved her hand. She heroically said, "My Xianxia is a rare thing. There won't be many left. What if we miss it?" Li Xianxia began to give orders. "Stupid Nanbei, go get an umbrella in the house and quickly follow us. Xianxia and Yufu, Wudong Mountain, is your territory. Is there a path to Yuqing Temple? If there is, then lead the way." Tong Qing, who was now full of admiration for the heroine Li Xianxia, stuck out his chest and proudly said, "Yes." Then the group of people majestically went to Yuqing Temple. The white-clothed monk didn't forget to look at their backs and remind them, "The path is difficult. Walk slowly." As if he felt the atmosphere was a little awkward, the white-clothed monk sat back on the small bench and looked at Bai Yu. He casually found a topic. "I heard that Mr. Bai Lian has 3 fears and 2 joys." Bai Yu nodded. "There are 3 fears. I'm afraid of thunder, afraid of walking, and afraid of Zhao Ningxian asking questions. There are 2 joys, reading to the eye and speaking to the heart." The white-clothed monk was puzzled. Zhao Ningxian. Bai Yu was a little sad. His real name is Zhao Jingxi. He is the only son of the old headmaster. His temperament is particularly simple and steady. After leaving the mountain, he experienced several tribulations and gained a blessing in disguise. Now his heart is close to the Tao. The white-clothed monk said, "Oh, is he the young Taoist who invited the Taoist Master Mansion's ancestor to come down to the mortal world?" In the end, Su Fengyan smashed the Jinwu Great Emperor's image with one slap. Bai Yu smiled bitterly and said nothing. The white-clothed monk seemed to have a deep prejudice against the young lord. He said angrily, "If you want to fight, then fight. Why do you have to pretend to be mysterious? What's the difference between you and a child crying and going home to ask for help from the elders? Especially that Su Fengyan, he's even more outrageous. He's bullying others with his power. What a disgrace." Bai Yu, who was now a retainer of the Su family in Beiliang, tactfully shut his mouth. The white-clothed monk snorted, "My daughter has never complained in front of me. Every time she fought, she beat those little baldies until they cried and ran back to their masters." Han Gui smiled knowingly. He seemed to be thinking of his disciple Qing Xian and the little Taoist boy Yufu who was brought back to the mountain by the headmaster Li Yufu. People outside the world may not be heartless. At this moment, Qi Xianxia, the only one of the 3 Taoists who cultivated, suddenly stood up. He turned around and looked as if he was facing a great enemy. The white-clothed monk was still sitting on the small bench calmly, slowly twirling the Buddha beads. A man with white hair on his temples appeared in everyone's sight. He was empty-handed. He smiled and said, "Since the Thunder Mind, I have comprehended 2 more moves in the past 20 years. I want to learn from the 2 of you. Now that Wang Xianji is dead, I can only come here to disturb you." Li Dongxin slowly stood up and said indifferently, "Hurry up and fight while my wife is not here. But let's make it clear in advance. Whether it's a fight or a battle of life and death, don't destroy the hut. Otherwise, I will really be angry." Chapter 1890. After hearing the monk's harsh words, he smiled and said, "I only care about the blade. I don't care if you're angry or not." Li Dongxin dismissed it with a smile and gently clasped his hands together, greeting him politely. Black Buddhist beads, white kasaya. It was truly out of this world. Qi Xianxia pulled Bai Yu under the roof of the thatched cottage. Han Gui followed closely behind. The three of them had guessed the identity of the visitor. It was unexpected, but it was also unexpected. Thunder Square. This was undoubtedly a thunderous title. Whenever people talked about spring and autumn sword armor Li Chungang, they would talk about the wooden horse ox, the two-sleeved green snake, and the sword opening the gate of heaven. Not to mention Liang Jianghu. Even in the imperial court, everyone knew the famous technique of the old minister of war, Thunder Square. It was with this technique that the Zhao clan of Liang Jianghu defeated Mao Shulang, a master of the Eastern Vietnam and Tang Empire. With this, he established his position as the #1 saber user in the world. Gu Zhonghang was to the saber, like Li Chungang to the sword, and Wang Xiu to the spear. This kind of martial arts status was the dream of countless people in Jianghu. However, the most embarrassing thing about Gu Jianghu was that he stood at the top of the world saber users. His ranking in the previous martial art competitions was not outstanding. Not to mention Wang Xianxia of Martial Emperor City. He was probably not even at the top. More importantly, in the competition between the sword and the saber, whether it was the old god of sword Li Chungang or the god of peach blossom sword Dong Tai, whether it was in terms of cultivation or pure combat power, Liang Jianghu recognized them as the top swordsmen of the new and old generation. They were far ahead of Gu Jianghu. When His Royal Highness first entered the world of martial artists, Wang Xianxia, Dong Tai, and Chao Chongqing were known as the only 3 outstanding people in the world. The other 7 people were clearly reduced to the role of reading books with the Crown Prince. The 7 people, including Gu Jiantang, were indispensable to the entire Chinese world of martial artists, but those who were ranked among the top 10 were dispensable. After Li Chungang returned to the realm of Earth Immortal, the person who used the sword declared that the gap between Gu Jiantang and Li Chungang was only 1 Gu Jiantang. In these 20 years, Gu Jiantang, who had been in charge of Great Peace City's Gulu for a long time, had never sparred with anyone. After that, he led the military of the 2 Liao countries with the title of Pillar of Great Peace and rarely came out. It was only when Chao Chongqing from West Chu brought Xianxia into the capital that Gu Jiantang, who had already given his beloved saber to his son-in-law, Yuan Tingshan, slightly revealed his outstanding strength. Gu Jiantang didn't seem to care about the ranking of the martial arts role, and was even less interested in the battle between the saber and the sword. Wang Xianxia had the domineering aura that no one dared to claim to be the first if he claimed to be the second in the world. Chao Chongqing had the magnificent feat of passing through the imperial city 3 times like passing through corridors. Dong Tai had the unrestrained freedom of riding on a donkey and watching the mountains and rivers. As a result, in the recent years, the new prince of Liang, Su Fengnian, had appeared out of nowhere. Xianyuan Qingfeng had suddenly risen to power in the Great Snow Plains, and the devil Luoyang had shaken both the northern Ming and Liang dynasties. Gu Jiantang was still quiet in the world of martial artists, watching the ebb and flow of the new and old world of martial artists, indifferent. Therefore, the Jianghu of the Central Plains that naturally rejected Great Peace City could never admire this supreme saber master, who was an extremely high official in the imperial court. However, it was this pillar of the country that was willing to stay out of the Jianghu that climbed Mount Wudong today, found the white-robed monk, Li Dongxin, and seemed to want to destroy his invincible Vajra with one strike. Other than being obsessed with the way of the sword, Xianxia had always been a pure and simple person. As for Gu Jiantang's visit, the little celestial master who had once abandoned the old way of the sword with great perseverance in Great Peace City, actually didn't care about the outcome of this peak battle. Therefore, he wouldn't make any comments or pretend to be surprised. Han Gui was praised by the old chief, Wang Zhongluo, as a sincere heart, a late bloomer, and was regarded as a good friend by the former chief, Hong Shixiang. At this moment, he was a little worried, afraid that if the commotion became too big, Wudong wouldn't be able to clean up the mess, adding unnecessary trouble to the young king. Mr. White Lotus, who only had 3 fears and 2 pleasures in life, was even less interested in fighting and killing. He moved a small stool and sat under the eaves, in a daze, his mind wandering thousands of miles away. Now that the two kings had joined forces to stir up the Central Plains, the imperial court originally promised to give Bailiang the grain, but there might be new problems. Chang Sui, who was in charge of the grain with his identity as the provincial governor of Lingzhou, had already sent a secret letter to Mount King Liangshan, requesting to use the Fish Dragon Gang's power to infiltrate the grain transportation of the Guangling River from Xianxia City to Lingzhou. If there was no other choice, they would need the blood of more than 20,000 gang members. To open the way, they would win millions of stones of blood-stained grain for the Bailiang border cavalry. As a result, the three of them didn't care why General Gu didn't carry a saber. Gu Jintang's talisman saber, Nanhua, and Wudong's sword maniac, Wang Xiaoping's talisman saber, Shunshu, were equally famous in the world. Gu Jintang was tall and had the typical physique of a northerner. His green robe was elegant, and he had the temperament of a southerner. Gu Jintang, but he used a saber. After defeating Mao Shulang, he was at the peak of Jianghu's reputation, and he was also praised as the Saber Saint. It was hard to say whether the nickname was wrong, but the name seemed to be wrong. Gu Jintang put one hand behind his back and slowly raised the other hand. The white-robed monk Li Dongxin put his palms together and bowed with one palm. He lowered his gaze and silently chanted, Amitabha. Chapter 1891. Many Jianghu people heard that Xianyuanzi had not only shown up on Mount Wudong, but had also asked for 4 marriage sticks in one go at a stall near the elephant washing pond. Su Fengyan's stall immediately became prosperous. Although they saw that Su Fengyan was just a young man and not the otherworldly expert that they thought he was, they just wanted to join in on the fun, so most of them were not stingy with their copper coins. In addition, this handsome fortune stick was indeed eloquent, so even if it was some mediocre or low-grade fortune stick, he could still speak eloquently and eloquently. Gradually, not only were the Jianghu people willing to fork out money, many pilgrims and tourists who did not involve themselves in the Jianghu also began to believe that it was true. This was especially true when a heroine from outside the Jianghu drew a very auspicious marriage stick, which made people eager to give it a try. This was because her 108th lot, May we be together for 1,000 li, was not only second to the best lot stick, but also came from that great literary woman's The First Snow. Everyone had the desire to win or lose. Until now, the most auspicious lot king had not been drawn yet, so naturally it made people eager to get into action. Many onlookers who had originally scoffed at the idea of drawing lots to sever marriage also began to try their luck. Unfortunately, it was strange that after more than 2 hours, more than 100 people had finished drawing their lots, but still no one had drawn the best lot stick from the bamboo tube. This kind of scene where people were still hugging their pipa and covering half of their faces thoroughly made people want to win in one move. Many people who did not believe in heresy simply drew their lots again. Everyone saw that the young man who explained the lot drank bowl after bowl of Wudong calming soup. The copper coins were 100 copper coins and 100 copper coins. Therefore, the large and small copper coins on the table could be said to be piled up into a mountain. It was extremely spectacular. The young vassal king, who had made a lot of money, explained to a strong man who had shaken the lot stick 3 times. He reached out his hand to cover the lot stick and suddenly said loudly, "Let's close the stall. Let's close the stall. Today is not the day to break a marriage." Behind a man whose face was full of resentment, a young man who had waited bitterly for nearly an hour suddenly jumped up and scolded, "Surnamed Su, are you playing with me?" Su Fengyan rolled his eyes and began to collect the copper coins. That person slapped the table. "If you dare to leave, don't blame me, Su, for exposing your secret." Su Fengyan raised his head and glanced at the exiled crown prince of the old western Shu. "Be careful not to step on dog poop when you cut off someone's path to wealth. Besides, do you think you can afford to pay the fee?" Su sneered, "Is 10,000 enough?" Su Fengyan stopped collecting the copper coins. The meaning behind Su's words was probably only understood by him, the king of Bailiang. 10,000. That was the source of 10,000 soldiers from Shuzhou. So Su Fengnian asked with a smile, "Do you mean what you say?" Swordsmith Qi, who was standing behind Su Su, said softly, "It is this old man's son's idea." Su Fengnian smiled and put two fingers together. "I will only help you with this amount." Su Su's face was full of anger. He leaned forward and pressed both hands on the table. He lowered his voice and said, "Do you think I'm a Taoist immortal who can scatter beans and turn them into soldiers?" Su Fengnian raised 3 fingers this time. "No sincerity. I will raise the price." Su Su's face darkened, and he panted. The blind Guqin player, Xue Songwan, who was carrying the Guqin case on his back, smiled and quietly pulled on Su Su's sleeve. Su Su snorted and crossed his arms in front of his chest. Su Fengnian withdrew his hand and put away his cynicism. His eyes suddenly became cold. He looked up at the 3 old Beimang people. "Some losses I have suffered once, and that is enough. For the sake of our past friendship, I will advise you not to learn from those spring and autumn clans. This old man, Zhao Dingxiu, knows better than you how our Su family deals with them." Su Su's face was red. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling. He was extremely ashamed. Xue Songwan, who was familiar with the inside story, sighed slightly and then gently held his hand. Su Su's eyes were vaguely moist. He held his hand tightly and turned his head away. It was unknown whether he didn't want to see the young king's face or he didn't dare. When this old man fled to the streets of Beimang, he had almost given up the idea of reviving Shishu. The reason why he made a comeback and made up his mind to return to the Central Plains was all because of this young king. Even their early smooth sailing was largely attributed to the various death soldiers that Beiliang buried in Shu and Zhao. However, when Chun Jibao was appointed as the king of Shishu, not only did he cut off the connection between Beiliang and them, but he also forced the real backbone of Shishu, Zhao Dingxiu, to change his mind. To put it nicely, they were judging the situation. To put it bluntly, they were burning the bridge after crossing the river. In the beginning, this old man even prepared for the worst. He prepared to face the wrath of Beiliang, especially Fu Shui and Yang Ying. But for some reason, the young king who stabbed them in the back seemed to be unaware of it. This undoubtedly made this old man, who was influenced by the benevolence of the Confucian school, feel deeply guilty. That was why Su Su and the other 2 went to the desert. After all, the white-clothed war saint, who once played with the territory of Shu and Zhao, was now in Guangling Road in Liyang. In order to fight for the Central Plains, most of the elite troops under the king's jurisdiction went out of Shu to the east. As a result, it gave this old man a chance to make up for it or to make a new bet. Sword craftsman Qi took off the sword box and gently put on the table. "This old man told me before leaving that 20,000 was the bottom line, plus this full armor snow as an extra." Chapter 1892. Su Fengnian slowly exhaled a mouthful of murky air that had accumulated for a long time. Su Fengnian was indeed resentful towards this old man's son who wholeheartedly supported the Su family in western Shu. If they had not rushed to Shu Zhao to raise the flag of restoring the country, many of the chess pieces that Beiliang had secretly buried there would not have surfaced so quickly. Even if they were not used, it would have been far better than the current awkward situation. If Chun Jibao had not completely fallen out with Beiliang back then, those spies and men of sacrifice who had used up so much of Beiliang's energy and financial resources would not have survived. According to Master Li Yishan's established plan, once Liang Imperial Court decided to drag them down in the future Battle of Liangmeng, Beiliang would directly intercept the local spearhead, Beiliang's strategic rear. Therefore, regarding the continuous infiltration of Shu Zhao and Zhao, Beiliang could be said to have spared no effort, far more than the Central Plains. Therefore, a certain diligent steward of a certain Junwang manor, an old-fashioned private school teacher teaching, a peddler running around the marketplace, a beautiful courtesan from the brothel, or even a military officer with real power in the Shu Zhao army, could all be the men of sacrifice of Fu Shui Fang. Taking a step back, Shu Zhao and Beiliang were cut in half by Chen Jibao. Even if the Su family's Iron Horse cavalry did not manage to defend Beiliang in the end, causing the Fu Shui Fang's chess pieces to be unable to achieve anything in the end. At the very least, those people could slowly grow old and die in Shuzhou and Zhao with a kind of unknown regret. Not like now, where they were like wandering ghosts exposed to the light of day. Not only did Qin Jibao know their identities, even Li Yong and Zhao Go had probably begun to secretly record it so that they could settle the score with them in the future. With regards to Su Fengyin did not hold any grudges. This young man was originally a puppet that could not even be considered as a hands-off shopkeeper. Under the general situation, he could only go with the flow. In Shu and Zhao, two places, Su pulled a blind zither player to pretend to be a young hero devil and wandered around the Jianghu wantonly. Perhaps it was a kind of mood similar to drowning one's sorrows in wine. Su Fengyin felt nothing but admiration for this swordsmith Qi, who had gifted him a new sword, spring and autumn. In the end, Su Fengyin was angry at Zhao Dingxiu's betrayal, but he resented his own carelessness even more. Sometimes, a single word from a monarch could lead to the rise of a nation or the fall of a nation. A single word from a historian determined whether a person would be remembered in the annals of history or go down in infamy. A single word from a general determined victory or defeat, life or death. War was a matter of national importance. It was not a joke. Perhaps the simple-minded Su was only guilty of his and this old man's betrayal. He did not think of the Bailiang death soldiers who had taken root in Shu for many years, or the deeper level of the Liangmang War. After all, this young man from a noble family only knew that he was an ordinary survivor of Beimang. He only knew that this old man's son was a pedantic and strict old scholar, and that Uncle Qi was nothing more than a blacksmith with a bit more strength. What bell and cauldron food, what monarch and country, what West Shu's imperial uncle dying at the city gate, what West Shu's minister dying together with the country was the champion of spring and autumn. Other than the golden dragon embroidered Shu brocade wrapped in swaddling clothes, he had never worn the crown prince's robe. Therefore, he did not understand the generosity at all. Su secretly sniffled, showing that his temperament was weak and had no ambition to speak of. He only longed for Jianghu and did not like the unfamiliar court and officialdom. After the fall of the country, the old officials of the Su clan would cry when they saw him. That kind of kneeling and kowtowing ceremony. Not only would it not make this unambitious young man feel happy, he would only feel that 1,000 jin weight was pressing down on his shoulders. In private, he once mocked himself to the blind female zither player that he admired. Su is useless. At some point, Wei Miao, who did not come with Su and the other two, had already stood behind the blacksmith surnamed Qi, invisibly cutting off the flow of people. Especially when the dazzling Miaojiang woman grinned and crushed the palm of a lecher. The crowd of kind-hearted men and women who came to Mount Wudong to burn incense began to scatter like birds and beasts. Most of the Jianghu people who were conceited about their martial arts did not go far, but they still stood some distance away and cautiously watched with cold eyes. Wei Miao took a few steps forward and said straightforwardly, "The king of Shu wants me to pass on a message to both of you. There is no problem in crossing the border." Su Fengyin saw that the blacksmith surnamed Qi frowned and understood. He asked, "When did he pass this message to you? Before or after the spring snow building incident?" Wei Miao said indifferently, "I will not say. It is not important." Su Fengyin did not pay attention to this famous grandmaster of Nanzhao and looked at the blacksmith surnamed Qi. "Also pass on a message to this old man Lu for me. The relationship between Bailiang and Shu is not like that between Bailiang and the Central Plains. Once we cannot defend Beiju as city, Shu is fated to have to face the Beimang Iron Cavalry. Therefore, 20,000 people must be at least, and they must be elites. Otherwise, if they come to Bailiang, they will only be of more help than help and will only be sending themselves to their deaths." The blacksmith surnamed Qi nodded. When the dust settled, Su was about to turn and leave when she heard the young king ask with a smile, "You have spent so much money on it. It can be called the most expensive marriage stick in the world. Don't you want to try your luck?" Su still insisted on leaving. Unexpectedly, Her sleeve was pulled. She turned her head. Although her eyes were closed, her face was full of hope. Susu's heart softened. She walked back to the table with a straight face. She picked up the bamboo tube and shook it violently. Finally, a bamboo stick was shaken out. Su Fengyan reached out and picked up the bamboo stick. He glanced at it and then showed a pitiful expression. Susu's mood instantly fell to the bottom. After the previous storm of internal injuries, the young man no longer had the slightest bit of his frivolous demeanor. His eyes were red again. Su Fengyan sighed. Susu turned to the blind female Guqin master and squeezed out a smile. "Let's go. This stick is not effective." Shui Songwan smiled and nodded. Su Fengyan raised his eyebrows. "Not effective?" Susu didn't even have the energy to bicker. She pulled Shui Songwan's hand and wanted to leave. But she heard a sentence behind her, "The 39th stick, the one you like, the one you like." "The stick is good." "Oh, it's not effective." Susu was like being struck by lightning. She turned around and grabbed the marriage stick in Su Fengyan's hand. Su Fengyan's hand, holding the stick, was high. "Give me the money first." 100 coins. Susu angrily looked at him. "You still want money?" Su Fengyan's other thumb and index finger gently twirled. "You can give me the money or not. You can look at the stick or not." Shui Songwan smiled and silently took out a beautiful purse made by the embroidered weavers. He was about to pay. Susu grabbed her wrist and fiercely stared at Su Fengyan. She gritted her teeth and said, "Is it really good?" Su Fengyan said lazily, "Believe it or not, it's up to you." Even the wooden swordsmith, surnamed Qi, couldn't bear it. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince met this young vassal king. It was really bad and painful. Shui Songwan still gave him 100 coins, but she stretched out her hand and opened her palm. She wanted to keep it, no matter if it was good or bad. At the same time, the blind zither master, whose finger mysterious realm was second only to the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai, was full of vigor. She didn't give the young vassal king a chance to change the bamboo stick. She wanted the real stick, no matter if it was good or bad. Su Fengyan smiled and handed over the bamboo stick. Susu grabbed it first and was stunned. Su Fengyan sighed. Shui Songwan's sad expression flashed. Sensing her subtle change, Susu immediately woke up and said angrily, "Surnamed Su, you bastard." Su Fengyan laughed. "I read it wrong. I read it wrong. It's the 81st stick. It's even better than the best stick. It's the most auspicious stick." Shui Songwan suddenly raised her head and looked at Susu. Her face was full of disbelief. Susu hugged her tightly and said with a sobbing tone, "It's really good. It's really good." Su Fengyan leisurely shook his head and said, "The 81st stick. You can be my wife." Chapter 1893. Shui Songwan slightly broke free from Susu's embrace. She turned her body, her cheeks flushed red for the first time, and then she solemnly bowed to the young king. Maybe she was grateful that he had set up a stall to interpret the lot, so Susu had drawn a good lot that she had never dreamed of. Maybe she was glad that he had not died in the assassination in the rainy alley of Beimeng that year, which allowed her to meet Susu. Maybe she was grateful that he had urged her to stay at the last moment, which was tantamount to helping Susu untie the knot in her heart. Su Fengyan waved his hand and joked, "Miss Shui, to be honest, this shortcake is really not worthy of you. He will draw a good lot, but Shui Songwan, you have truly met a bad person. So if it was you who drew the lot, I dare to say that it would definitely be a bad one. Draw it." Susu had long been tormented by Su Fengyan to the point that she did not have any energy left. Even her words of "your mother's bullshit" sounded weak. Su Fengyan beat a drowning dog. "Shortcake, since it is a good lot, then give another 101. It is such a joyous occasion. You cannot save this little money." Susu did not say anything and pulled Shui Songwan away. Although he was a minister that supported the dragon, second only to this old man's son Zhao Dingxiu, the swordsmith surnamed Qi did not participate in military and political affairs. He cupped his hands to Su Fengyan to bid farewell. Su Fengyan also stood and cupped his hands to send him off. Since they met in Jianghu, then they did not meet in Jianghu. There is only Jianghu, no court. After the spring and autumn period, there were two battles between grandmasters that fascinated Liang Jianghu. One was the battle between Li Chungang and Wang Xinji on the Eastern Sea. The other was the battle between Nu Liang Wang Su Fengyan, the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai, and the great Guanzi Chao Chongqing. The three fought in Graden City. As for the battle between Toba and Dong Tai, or the battle between Su Fengyan and Toba, which took place over 1,000 li in the western regions, because there were not many spectators, it was far less impressive than the former. Today, in front of the straw hut, it was even more lonely. There were only 3 spectators, and they were not the kind of Taoists who liked to gossip. Presumably, in the end, most of the Jianghu would not hear about this peak conflict. However, between the two sides, one was an eminent monk who had entered great peace in white robes and enjoyed the highest reputation in the world. The other was a pillar of the country who held half of the dynasty's military power. Neither of them would care about the false reputation of the Jianghu. Gu Jiantang suddenly laughed involuntarily. He withdrew his palm and shook his head. He wanted to say something, but stopped himself. Narrowing his eyes, Baiyu asked curiously, "Why aren't they fighting?" Xianxia said indifferently, "It's over." Baiyu was taken aback. "What? Fighting is popular in the Jianghu now?" Xianxia stood ramrod straight under the eaves. From his position, although he could only see the back of the white-robed monk, Xianxia could still rely on the slight trembling of the snow-white Xianxia. It was just that Xianxia was forcefully suppressing it. The world of Fangzhong, a Xianxia, was equivalent to a small kiliacosm. Only Baiyu and Han Gui could not see that world clearly. Once they entered it, the world would be turned upside down. To put it simply, Gu Jintang / seemed to be casual and did not seem to have any power behind it. If it were someone else who was at the foot of the mountain would have been split open. If they were at the mouth of the river would have been flooded dozens of miles by the seawater. The string of pearls in front of the white-robed monk's chest slowly quieted down. At this moment, a large peak to the north of Big Lotus Peak suddenly shattered, the sound as heavy as thunder. Gu Jiantang said helplessly, "Li Xiaoxin, this isn't appropriate, is it?" The white-robed monk smiled. "Sorry, after this poor monk went up the mountain. This poor monk watched the Taoist practice martial arts every morning. This poor monk also learned something and learned how to use 4 tails to deflect 1,000 pounds." Although he said that he was sorry, the middle-aged monk did not seem to have any sense of embarrassment. Gu Jiantang snorted coldly. The white-robed monk hesitated for a moment, then said with a serious expression, "Grand strength is similar to Wang Xinji's absolute strength. If it were Wang Xinji, you would also be able to injure him. Of course, if you want to win against Wang Xinji with this, it is still unrealistic." Gu Jiantang asked calmly, "Is that all?" The white-robed monk smiled. "Of course, the most important thing is that this move of yours can damage one's qi. If you hit him 7 or 8 times, Wang Xinji's qi will drop rapidly. Otherwise, I would not have used this move of yours to deflect it to the back of the mountain." Gu Jiantang said proudly, "I can hit him 12 times. The white-robed monk said exasperatedly, "Do you think you have a celestial physique that Su Gai inherited from Gao Shulu? And the great yellow court of Wudong that has an endless flow of qi? Wang Xinji can smash you to death with 3 or 4 punches." Gu Jiantang laughed coldly. The white-robed monk touched his bald head. "You really don't believe me. In this world, there are only a handful of people who truly know how powerful Wang Xinji is. Li Chungang, Su Fengyan, and at most Hong Shixiang. The others, even Dong Tai and Chao Chongqing, are unable to fully understand. After all, those two have never had a true life and death battle with Wang Xinji. Also, even if this poor monk does not use the essence of Wudong's martial arts and stand still for you to hit 12 times, this poor monk's body will still be as immovable as a mountain. It's just that I will have to do this personally soon, so I can't afford to waste my strength here." Gu Jiantang was silent. The white-robed monk sighed and said, "Gu Jiantang, if you can focus on the blade without any distractions, you might have a chance to fight for the title of #1 in the world." Gu Jiantang regained his composure and said with a smile, "In this Gu's opinion, the blade can only be used to kill people on the battlefield. Using it to fight for the name of Jianghu is too much of a waste. The sword is distinguished in Jianghu. The blade drinks blood on the battlefield." Perhaps this was the true understanding of the great general Gu Jiantang. Gu Jiantang finally asked, "I want to know, who in the world can break your Vajra physique?" The white-robed monk touched his head and extended 3 fingers. Dong, Tai's Taiya sword. Gu Jiantang nodded. He had already guessed it. The white-robed monk continued, "This poor monk's wife's snoring." Gu Jiantang took a deep breath. He left without saying goodbye. He didn't want to know who the third person was. The white-robed monk continued, "Then there's this poor monk's daughter's small wooden mallet. She likes to use her father's head as a wooden fish. His daughter doesn't know how to care for her father, but her father naturally does." Bai Yu and Han Gui looked at each other and smiled. The most difficult things in the world didn't seem difficult in front of the white-robed monk Li Dongxin. Han Gui suddenly said with a bitter expression, "Teacher, what about that damaged mountain peak?" The white-robed monk turned his head and said with a smile, "Find Su and ask for money to repair it." Han Gui thought for a moment. "That's a good idea." As the provincial governor of Liangzhou, Bai Yu quickly waved his hands. No, our Bailiang doesn't have much money now." Not long after Gu Jiantang left, the group of people who went to buy rouge returned earlier than expected. Behind them, the 2 children, Qing Xian and Yu Fu, were secretly laughing. Among the 3 people in front, Li Dongbei was pulling Wu Nanbei's ear, and Li Dongxin's wife was pulling her daughter's ear. The woman said with annoyance and anger, "Li Zi, are you still mother's daughter? If you didn't drag that stupid Nanbei to listen to you talk about Jianghu in delay time, he would have gone to Yuqing Temple earlier and bought the Mian Yinji from the tobacco willow lane." Li Dongbei pulled on the stupid Nanbei's ear and said angrily, "It's all your fault. What Mian Yinji from the tobacco willow lane? You said it. Why didn't you say it earlier?" Wu Nanbei said with grievance, "Master's wife, Li Zi, I didn't know that Master had hidden money from the start." The 3 of them looked at the white-robed monk. The middle-aged monk put his palms together and looked up at the sky. He muttered, "Buddha, please bless us. We will have food to eat tonight." At this moment, no one knew that the string of Buddhist beads on the white-robed monk Li Dongxin's chest was actually a string that connected 108 peachwood beads. Because of years of wear and tear, and also because of Gu Jiantang's blade, it had already dissipated like smoke. Although there was no string, the string of Buddhist beads was still connected. It was actually done by Li Dongxin in one breath. The affairs of the world were unpredictable. Dongxin was normal. Chapter 1894. Inside and outside the hall, where Zhenwu the Great Emperor was worshipped, the incense was burning. An old Taoist with a solemn face quickly stepped over the threshold. Seeing the tall figure in white, the old man calmed down and slowed down his pace, standing side by side. The figure in white, who was taller than the average Bailiang man, was actually a young woman. Her face was faintly radiant. This was probably the so-called solemnity of a treasure, like a bodhisattva descending to the world. The elderly Taoist was originally here to take over the task of knocking the chimes. Although his seniority on Wudong Mountain was the highest, and he was the great spiritual master who had been in charge of the mountain's commandments for dozens of years, he still had to attend to everything personally. When he was approaching the main hall, he sensed her unusual aura. The elderly Taoist was well aware that, to be precise, she was the first one to discover him, and then she deliberately revealed some clues. The old Taoist followed her line of sight and saw a devout believer kneeling 3 times and kowtowing 9 times on a futon. Although his body was extremely weak, the etiquette of kowtowing was meticulous. The old Taoist was very familiar with this. When he was young, he was brought to the mountain by his master, Huang Manshan, to cultivate. He was Wang Zhonglou and Song Jiming's senior and junior brothers. Now that he was almost 100 years old, the old Taoist had been burning incense for people for nearly 80 years. The old Taoist said with emotion, People pray to immortals for longevity, for relief from worries, for freedom from suffering. The tall woman in white said indifferently, "Then why does Wudong Mountain want to cut off the thoughts of all the cultivators in the world?" The old man was none other than Wudong's enlightened immortal Xianxia, the senior brother of the former leader Xianxia, and the senior uncle of the current leader Liu Fu. The old man smiled and said, "Master Tantai, I only know the rules and regulations of this mountain. I know what should be done and what should not be done. But if you ask me about the art of immortality or some other bigger questions, I would be asking the blind. If you had climbed the mountain earlier, my master, senior brother, and a junior brother would have been able to answer. Even if you had climbed the mountain 10 days earlier, the chief would have been able to answer." Tantai calmly withdrew her gaze and looked up at the majestic statue of Zhenwu the Great Emperor. It was high and mighty, overlooking the world. Is it hard to understand? Or do you not want to understand? Why did the spring and autumn period fall? Why did the central plains sink? It was because a small group of tycoons had blocked the entire world's path to prosperity. It was obvious that if the current emperor of Liang discriminated against the white-clothed Han clan and only promoted the descendants of aristocratic families to fill the imperial court, the fate of the Zhao clan would not last long. Running water doesn't rot, the pivot doesn't rust. How simple is this logic? The old Taoist smiled and nodded. Grandmaster Tantai is right. Tantai, Ping Jing asked again, is the ambition of Mount Wudong so great that they want to turn the whole world into a separatist town? The old Jinren asked. In the eyes of sect master Tantai, the mortals in the human world are inferior to the immortals in the heavens. Tantai, Ping Jing rudely stretched out her finger and pointed at the statue. Isn't it? Then why is this statue able to sit high up and look down, making people willingly bow their heads and enjoy 1,000 years of incense? The old Jinren was not annoyed by the disrespectful behavior of the former leader of the Qi cultivators in the south. He shook his head and said, "It's still the same as what I said before. When people pray for immortals to grow old, they have to ask for something. I'll be bold to make an inappropriate analogy. It's like the officialdom at the foot of the mountain or the marketplace. When you ask for someone's favor, you always have to bring some gifts. When you talk to someone, you always have to lower your voice. That's how it is. That's how it is. But it doesn't mean that the person who is being asked can do whatever he wants." The old Jinren, who was not talkative, started to talk. His tone was a little heavier. "I heard that the immortals in the heavens are good at fishing for the fate of the human world. The lifespan of a person and the national throne of a country are all under their control. If it's just that the heavens are ruthless, it's fine that people don't die early because they're evil and people don't live long because they're kind. But if you put yourself in their shoes, how sad is it when you think that your fate of marriage, lifespan, fortune, and so on are all controlled by others? How sad is that? My master once told us 6 brothers that the heavens are vigorous, and a gentleman should constantly strive for self-improvement. He's willing to work hard for the difficulties in life. He's not willing to be born with a good life and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. He's not willing to have everything be inflexible. Although we Taoists are people outside the mountain, we can't forget that we're still people of the world. We live in the world and die in the world. From ancestor Lu to Huang Manshan, to Chunyao's generation of Wang Zhongluo, Song Jiming, Yu Xingrui, Wang Xiaoping, and Hong Shixiang. None of them could live forever. Some of them couldn't and didn't want to, such as Song Jiming and Chun Yao. Some of them could but weren't willing, such as Wang Zhongluo and Yu Xingrui. Some of them were disdainful, such as Hong Shixiang and Wang Xiaoping. Chun Yao suddenly laughed out loud. He turned his head and looked straight at this land immortal who was said to have reached the celestial realm. He was fearless. How many people can ascend in the human world in 100 years? Among the few people, who isn't a banished immortal who descended to the human world? Why? Who is Grandmaster Tantai trying to persuade? I only know that the person who can make Sect Master Tantai do this is definitely not this Zhenwu Great Emperor. Tantai Ping Jing frowned. A strange smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She asked, "Have you ever wondered if the king of Bailiang, Su Fengnian, and your sect master, Liu Fu, are banished immortals? Why do they have to commit treason in this world? Qin Yao's face was full of righteousness. He laughed and said, I'm only in charge of Wudong's commandments. Why should I care about that? Tantai Pingjing's face was cold. What a Wudong mountain! As expected of ancestor Lu's dojo. Qin Yao still smiled and said, You flatter me. Tantai Pingjing turned and looked, her eyes snow-white. Yu Xingrui stood outside the door of the main hall. However, she looked directly at the small lotus peak outside the big lotus peak. In the next moment, her figure dissipated. Yu Xingrui, who hurried over, was relieved. Qin Yao slowly walked towards this junior apprentice brother. The old spiritual master, who was famous for being serious, made a rare joke. Junior apprentice brother, you quickly wipe your sweat. Yu Xingrui asked worriedly. Are we letting her go just like that? Qin Yao said open-mindedly. Actually, the fact that she's willing to show herself at this time means that she doesn't have any killing intent. Think about it. His Highness is on the mountain, Dong Tai is here, Li Xiaoxin is here, and so many grandmasters are here. Who would dare to behave atrociously here? After all, she's not Wang Xinji from Martial Emperor City. Yu Xingrui nodded and said, That's true. Qin Yao suddenly asked, Have you really thought it through? Yu Xingrui said in a low voice, Unlike you guys, I, Yu Xingrui, have been born and raised in Liangzhou for generations. Qin Yao patted Yu Xingrui's shoulder unceremoniously. Then go without worry. There's Yu Fu, Han Gui, and that Yu Fu. They're all very good. Yu Xingrui said regretfully, Unfortunately, I probably won't be able to wait until the day junior apprentice brother becomes enlightened. Qin Yao nodded. Senior apprentice brother is about the same. Senior apprentice brother, can I talk to you about something? Go ahead. Junior apprentice brother is still so young. He's at the age where he loves to sleep. How can there be an elder like you who knocks on his door every day before dawn? Junior apprentice brother, are you the disciplined Taoist on our mountain or me? Is there anything else? Chapter 1895. Yes, junior brother is occasionally greedy and stealthily buys some candied haws and other snacks when he interprets the lot for others. Senior brother, can you not be so discerning every time? He is so young, but he has to copy the scriptures several times. I feel sorry for him. Jade Axe has been quietly waiting outside the room every time. Oh, senior brother almost forgot that junior brother is now your disciple's disciple in name. The three of you are very close. Senior brother, you are a little jealous, aren't you? Haha, I can't help it. Junior brother has accepted a good disciple. Junior brother, aren't you supposed to be on duty today? How do you have time to chat with senior brother here? Copy Taoist Ishu tonight. Senior brother, then you should be striking the chime at this time. Haha, I can't help it. Senior brother is in charge of Wudong Mountain's commandments. In front of the lot booth, Su and the other two had gone far away. Wei Miao was still in the distance. The enchanting Miao woman who had been married for a long time was sitting on the bench in front of the table in high spirits. She looked at the young lord who had begun to close the booth and said in a bad Central Plains official's accent, Little handsome brother, do you also interpret the lot for me? Su Fingyin couldn't help laughing and said, Sister, you have been married for many years. Why are you still asking for marriage? She said carelessly, I can't help it. My man is not afraid of anything. He is just afraid that I don't want him. I don't have any thoughts. I just want to see if I'm married badly. Wei Miao, who was short and average-looking, grinned. As a man, and one of the few martial arts grandmasters in Jianghu at that, his temper was really too good to be true. Su Fingyin looked at the couple and said firmly, No need to look. It must be a good lot. The Miao woman hesitated and finally gave up. When Wei Miao left, he turned his head and looked deeply at Su Fingyin. Su Fingyin naturally wouldn't take away the table and the stool. He also didn't intend to take the lot. Of course, there were a small mountain of copper coins, not a single coin less. This was the life-saving money for him to make up for his mistakes. At this moment, Su Fingyin was slightly stunned. A young woman wearing a wooden hairpin and a cloth skirt slowly walked over. Even if her clothes were shabby, even if she didn't know any martial arts. Her unique aura that seemed to be tainted with the arrogance of the Tian family could be seen at a glance. She held a cloth bag in her arm, which was filled with golden persimmons that had just been picked from the trees. Su Fengyin felt a headache coming on. She was on Mount Wudong, while Gu Jianeng had just come up the mountain. Actually, it was not appropriate for either of them to meet each other. One of them was a princess who had died of illness in the palace, according to the history books of the imperial court. The other was a great pillar of the country who was loyal to the Zhao family of Liang. It was none other than Princess Sui Zhu, Zhao Fengya. She was sitting on a bench that had already been closed, facing him. Su Fengyin returned to his seat and helplessly asked, "Why are you here?" She smiled indifferently and said, "Let's see if I can shake out the first lot." Su Fengyin was about to speak when she continued, "Where did you hide it? Take it out. Otherwise, how can I shake it out?" Su Fengyin shook his sleeve unabashedly, and a bamboo stick fell out. She sneered and said, "You really know how to do business. Even if you can't become the king of Bailiang in the future, you can still hide in the Central Plains and become rich." Su Fengyin chuckled and said, "Should I say that you have a crow's mouth, or should I say that I'm borrowing your auspicious words?" She said with a cold face, "Lot cylinder." She was as arrogant as she was in the past. Su Fengyin only cared about money and not people. "You have 100 copper coins?" She picked up a ripe persimmon from the cloth bag and put it on the table. Su Fengyin widened his eyes. It was not because of the arrogance of Princess Liang in the past. It was because of the appearance of another princess behind Zhao Fengya. It was just the princess of Dechu in the past. Zhao Fengya turned her head and glanced at her. "Oh, the female sword immortal who likes to fly around and show off her power has come," Jiang and I said unhappily. "It's none of your business." For some reason, Jiang and I felt that the culprit who had once destroyed her vegetable garden, even if she had become the emperor of West Chu, even if she was now a female sword immortal, she still did not have the confidence to face Zhao Fengya, who was supposed to be a fallen phoenix who was inferior to a chicken. In terms of fighting, when they first met, Zhao Fengya, the Princess Sui Zhu, who was familiar with archery and horses, was slightly better. Now, Jiang and I could probably beat down 1,000 Zhao Fengyias. But the more this was so, the less Jiang and I wanted to fight. In terms of cursing, Jiang and I was probably not Zhao Fengya's opponent in the past, present, and future. Zhao Fengya said domineeringly, "First come, first served. I'll shake the lot first." Jiang and I curled her lips, but she did not dare to say anything in response. Su Fengyin sighed and put down the bamboo tube. Zhao Fengya raised her head and said, "When shaking the lot, don't do anything." Su Fengyin rolled his eyes and waved his hand, indicating for Zhao Fengya to quickly shake the lot. Zhao Fengya picked up the bamboo tube with one hand and casually turned it a few times. She gently tossed out a bamboo stick. She casually picked it up and glanced at it. Then, the corners of her mouth curled up. She turned her head to look at Jiang and I, who was clearly much more nervous than she was, and heavily slapped down the bamboo stick. She stood up and left, unkindly taking the persimmon with her. Only when Zhao Fengya turned around did Jiang and I sneakily pick up the bamboo stick. Shock, grievance, resentment, and sadness appeared one by one on her devastatingly beautiful face. In the end, she was on the verge of tears. The confused Su Fengyin leaned over to take a look. Su Fengyin somewhat understood Su's feelings. It really was tit for tat. The lot in Jiang Ni's hand was the lot that Zhao Fengya had casually shaken out. A good match? A celestial beauty. What more could a husband ask for? The first lot. Su Fengyin pressed his hand to his forehead, speechless. Alas, the copper coins that he had spent so much effort to obtain had been completely earned for nothing. Su Fengyin could not help but be careful. He was afraid that this pitiful little mud person in front of him would also do the same casually. She only needed to lift her hand, and a great Liang dragon sparrow would fly out of the red sandalwood sword sheath in the thatched hut. Su Fengyin could not help but sigh, feeling sad. She quickly threw the lot back into the bamboo tube like it was scalding her hand. Then, she turned her head and wiped her face. She turned her head again, not looking at Su Fengnian or the lot tube. She only stared at the mountain of copper coins. She asked in a soft voice, "You earned all of this in the afternoon?" Su Fengnian, who was filled with sorrow, nodded his head. Her tone suddenly became light. "How much?" Su Fengnian said in a soft voice, "It's not a small amount. If it's converted to silver, it should be around 100 taels." Her eyes immediately lit up. Her originally dark and gloomy face was glowing. She raised her head and asked in a probing voice, "It's all mine?" Su Fengnian held back his laughter. "Of course." Su Fengnian stood up and struck while the iron was hot. He gave Jiang and I a large cloth bag that he had prepared earlier. "Help me hold the money. It's a bit heavy." She nodded her head like a chicken pecking rice. She quickly stood up and walked around the table, standing beside him. She bent down and opened the bag with both hands. Her eyes were very serious, and her face was filled with anticipation. Su Fengnian placed his elbow on the table and swept the money into the bag. The copper coins on the table were squeezed together, and the copper coins in the bag were knocked together, making a clattering sound. In the beginning, her smile was still reserved, but she did not hide it anymore. His hands did not stop moving. He only secretly turned his head to look at the side of her face, looking at that dimple. Being liked by someone was the most joyous thing in the world. She did not look away as she said with a smile, "It's really heavy." Su Fengnian replied, "When we go back, I'll carry the bag." She nodded her head and said, "In." Chapter 1896. The group of four passed through the golden persimmon forest of Little Lotus Peak and came to the turtle-carrying tablet at the top of the mountain. It was built under the orders of the Great Feng dynasty. The inscription on the tablet was the Great Peak of the Imperial Taoist Ancestral Court, which symbolized the glory of Mount Wudong hundreds of years ago. The only woman among the four tourists held a ripe persimmon in her hand. She stood under the turtle-carrying tablet and looked up to read the inscription. The other three men stood side by side on the cliff, looking at the scenery at the foot of Mount Wudong. The oldest man stood in the middle with a saber at his waist. On his left was a thin swordsman with a long sword on his back. On his right was an elegant scholar with white hair. Then, when the beautiful woman turned her head, she saw a strange scene. She didn't know when there was only one person left standing on the cliff. It turned out that the swordsman and saber had retreated dozens of steps and were not far from her. She gently walked to the two elders and asked the old man with the saber softly, "Grandpa Mao, Uncle Cheng is—" The three of them were Lin Honyuan, the young master of the Southern Dragon Palace, Mao Shulang, and the sword master Ji Luan. Mao Shulang, with white hair and eyebrows, lowered his voice and said concisely, "Qiji." Lin Honyuan naturally couldn't understand such a riddle. He turned to look at Ji Lu and the chief visiting official of the Dragon Palace. The latter hesitated for a moment and said softly, "Old Cheng, as the first distinguished Confucian scholar of the old Southern Tang, was born in a noble family, but he didn't like fame. He traveled all over the country all year round. Previously, he felt guilty for not being able to do as he wished when his country was destroyed, so he started to practice martial arts. After so many years, he climbed up step by step on the path of martial arts. Finally, for some reason, he stayed in the finger-profound realm for as long as 20 years. This trip to Liang, he accumulated a lot and showed signs of breaking through. It is similar to Chao Chongqing of West Chu and Xianyuan Jingchang of Mount Hui. Lin Honyuan was surprised. Uncle Cheng is finally going to enter the celestial state? Mao Shulang didn't care if she was the future master of the Dragon Palace, nor did he care about her relationship with the Southern King. Quiet. Lin Honyuan suddenly kept quiet and blushed. Cheng Baishuang clasped her hands behind her back and gazed towards the south. The old Confucian scholar stood on the edge of the cliff and muttered to himself, outside the body, grasping the tail of a spear and speaking plainly. It's really like drawing a cake. Orifices within orifices. Ask the praying mat what is going on in your heart. Only then will you be at peace. Moral essays are destroyed, but the spirit is everlasting. Fame and fortune will vanish in the wake of the world, but integrity will never change. If you don't frown in your life, there won't be anyone in the world who will be angry. How ridiculous! The old man slowly closed his eyes. The wind blew against his face, and his sleeves fluttered. Mao Shulong's eyes suddenly widened. In an instant, he had already unsheathed his saber. His figure swept forward, brushing past Cheng Baishuang, who seemed to be resting with her eyes closed. He crashed into the edge of the cliff and was only one step away from falling off the cliff. The old man's saber was silent, but it was filled with boundless energy. It was as if a bright crescent moon had appeared in front of him. Lin Honyuan saw a woman in white appear out of nowhere in the sky above the cliff. She leaned back, her sleeves fluttering. She stretched out 2 fingers and blocked Mao Shulong's Gang Qi. The immortal-like woman in white retreated for dozens of feet before offsetting the powerful and unparalleled Gang Qi. The tall woman stood up straight and hovered in the air with no foothold. The mountain wind was whimpering under her feet, and the clouds were lingering around her. Lin Honyuan gasped. She recognized the identity of the uninvited guest. Tantai Pingjing of the Guanyin sect, the leader of the Qi cultivators in the world. Although Lin Honyuan was always at a disadvantage in the scheming against the young lords, in fact, she was not stupid. Instead, she was extremely intelligent. She immediately understood that Cheng Baishuang's natural ascension, this time, was not as simple as reaching the celestial phenomenon from the finger Xian. Mao Shulang, who was furious, did not care whether he would disturb Cheng Baishuang's state of oblivion. He said to the immortal in white in a stern voice, "If you want to make trouble, you have to ask my saber first." Tantai Pingjing glanced at the old Confucian who was unaware of the outside world and said calmly, "How many days of glory can you have?" Mao Shulang clenched the hilt of his saber, squinted, and said in a deep voice, "I'm just a boorish man. I don't understand the mystery of Tantai Pingjing." Tantai Pingjing no longer paid attention to Mao Shulang. She looked away slightly and said to Cheng Baishuang, "Since you have such a state of mind, you should know that there will be at most 4 or 5 Earth Immortals in the future. The 3 sects of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism will occupy 1 or 2 places in the Jianghu. At this time, you force yourself to break the realm. Not only is there a fine line between you and the realm of Earth Immortals, but you also gave up the sage of Confucianism. What's the difference between this and seeking death?" Cheng Baishuang slowly opened her eyes and said frankly, "Is the sage of Confucianism still the sage of Confucianism?" "I, the sage of Confucianism, once said that people are not afraid of death. Why should I fear death? Today, I, Cheng Baishuang, have never coveted immortality. Why should I tempt it with immortality?" Tantai Pingjing sneered. "You are all frogs at the bottom of the well." Cheng Baishuang was high-spirited. She laughed loudly and said, "It is said that capable ministers are born in prosperous times and famous generals are born in troubled times. It is also said that poets are lucky when the country is unfortunate. I, Cheng Baishuang, have made some sour poems. I am not willing to nod my head and agree. When the country is in trouble, I am willing to die. Even if I die, I have no regrets. How can we, scholars, let the warriors on the battlefield enjoy the beauty alone?" Tantai Pingjing sneered, "If you want to die, just die. You are just another lonely ghost of Confucianism in my sect's Watermoon courtyard." Cheng Baishuang smiled boldly and said loudly, "That's good. Today's people are worthy of the ancients." Tantai Pingjing was silent and looked indifferent. Lin Honyuan opened his eyes wide and his mind swayed. He stared at the beautiful and tall woman in a daze. Lin Honyuan was no stranger to Qi cultivators who claimed to enforce justice on behalf of heaven. There were several such strange people around Zhaobing. The king of Yin Shi, they all had a cold aura that looked at the world as if they were watching a fire burning across the river. They were extremely unreasonable. Those immortals in white hated the fame and fortune that ordinary people all yearned for. They were silent all year round. When ordinary people interacted with them, they would not expect them to bare their hearts to you. Because Tantai Pingjing was a woman, Lin Honyuan had always worshipped her. Jiang and I was another worthy female sword fairy after Wu Su, and Xianyuan Qingfeng was also a character with the best cultivation in Jianghu. However, these two women were after all too young. It was difficult for the proud Lin Honyuan to sincerely admire them. Tantai Pingjing was different. She was 100 years old, but her face was still youthful. She was an immortal in the human world. Therefore, the person that Lin Honyuan admired and envied most in his life was undoubtedly Tantai Pingjing. It should be known that the old beauty of a famous general was especially pitiful. Lin Honyuan had all kinds of ambitions since a long time ago. One of them was to ask Tantai Pingjing about the unique method of retaining one's youthful appearance. Lin Honyuan hoped that she would die young. Unfortunately, Tantai Pingjing came and went without a trace. She did not even look at Lin Honyuan from the beginning to the end. Ji Lu and Cheng Baishuang had known each other for dozens of years. Their relationship was the most sincere. He said sadly, "Old Cheng, is it really like what Tantai Pingjing said?" Cheng Baishuang did not hide. He nodded and said, "My celestial state is indeed spoiling things through excessive enthusiasm. I can't maintain it for a long time. As for becoming a Confucian saint one day, I don't even think about it." Ji Lu sighed deeply. Cheng Baishuang comforted his best friend. A scholar should always put what he learned into practice. What's the benefit of being a prime minister in the mountain and an immortal in the forest? Ji Lu exhaled deeply and said in a low voice, "Fine, I'll accompany you to the outside of Liangzhou Pass." Cheng Baishuang asked with a smile, "Why do you want to go?" Ji Lu pointed at the long sword on his back. "This old friend of mine hasn't cut off the head of a Beimeng barbarian." Lin Honyuan was shocked. If Cheng Baishuang, who had no roots in Jianghu, wanted to stay in Beiliang, she, as a minor leader of Jianghu in Nanjiang, didn't care. But if the chief guest of the sect also stayed, she would not be able to explain it to Mr. Nalen. Mao Shulang, who had sheathed his sword, suddenly said, "Count me in." Lin Honyuan was stunned. She came with 3 grandmasters of martial arts, but when she left, she was going to be all alone? In addition to staying young forever, her other ambition was to arm wrestle with Xianyuan Qingfeng and become the second female leader of Wulin in Liang. Mao Shulang, Cheng Baishuang, and Ji Luin, who were close to her, were originally indispensable helpers for her to reach the top of Jianghu. Lin Honyuan knew that once they made up their minds, perhaps only Mr. Nalen could persuade them to change their minds. She thought of her evil plan not long ago and murmured, "Karma is not good." The Confucian scholar Cheng Baishuang looked into the distance again and said loudly for no reason, "Confucius said, 300 poems, in a word, the most moving part is thinking without evil." The old scholar with white hair on his temples was full of smiles at this moment. In the past, young people thought without evil. In their twilight years, they should be like this. Chapter 1897. In the darkness of the night, the young lord who had just been kicked out of his small wooden bed moved a bamboo chair to sit under the eaves. He did not treat himself too badly. He did not forget to bring out a pot of green ant wine and a plate of peanuts. He did not drink the wine. The small plate was placed on his robe, and he slowly ate the peanuts one by one. The night was long, so he should eat sparingly. Su Fingyin sighed. Haste makes waste. He thought that she was in a good mood because he had helped her earn so many copper coins. In fact, she did let him touch the small bed. However, when his paw just touched a certain place that was finally not peaceful, he was immediately met with an unexpected disaster before he had time to savor it. Su Fingyin lowered his head and glanced at his crotch. He said sadly, "Jianghu's loyal young man, you enjoy the blessings and I bear the difficulties. That's loyal enough, right?" After muttering, Su Fingyin leaned back in the chair and held the back of his head with his hands. He looked up and saw the bright moon in the sky. It was autumn, and the night was as cold as water. Su Fingyin was aware of the confrontation between Gu Jiantang and the white-robed monk during the day, as well as the disturbance caused by Tantai Pingjing in the 2 lotus peaks. He even knew that Gu Jiantang and Tantai Pingjing finally met at the foot of the mountain. There were some things that he could not care about, and he could not care about. If he really cared about it, it would only add to his troubles. Hutu City, the northernmost city outside of Liangzhou Pass and Beimeng, the center of the army with the most troops, advanced on 3 fronts. They were strictly organized and watertight. Fortunately, Chao Wei and Xie Bian joined hands and achieved a great victory at Miyun Pass in the western regions, which was beyond everyone's expectations. However, the 2 cavalry troops under Xie Bian's command, as well as the horse bandits recruited by Han Wenbao and Chai Dondi, were almost completely wiped out. The Huayang Pass Governor-General had already made an exception to promote Xie Shibong to Deputy General of Liuzhou. He was temporarily in charge of the 2 towns of Linyao and Fengxiang, and the 20,000 monk soldiers of Lanta Mountain were also under his command. Xie Shibian's cavalry didn't suffer too many losses. Mount Qingliang and the Governor-General Manor hastily came to a temporary decision, deciding to have Xie Shibian lead the troops to charge north. Together with Yuluan Saber Division's Yuzhou elite cavalry that was already approaching northern Mang's Gentleman's Pavilion, they formed a coordinated force to advance side by side, directly assaulting the Southern Dynasty's west capital. Yuzhou Gourd Pass was calm. The group of 20 or so swordsmen that had left the Wu family sword tomb could take this opportunity to lead a small group of cavalry outside the pass. Although it was just icing on the cake, it was still a good thing. North of Qingcang City in Liuzhou, Huang Manor, and Ko Jianghuai's 2 cavalry units were ready to set off. This afternoon, he had reached an agreement with Su Su. The 20,000 Shu Zhao soldiers were not like a drop in a bucket, but they could only be used as a surprise force outside of Liangzhou Pass. In a battle where there was very little room to maneuver, it was not a good thing to fight a battle where the sword needed to be unconventional. Su Fengyan hoped that in the end, there would be no need for the 20,000 soldiers to rush to the battlefield. As for the message that Wei Miao sent to Qin Zhibao, saying that he would not stop this old man's son Zhao Dingxiu's troops from crossing Shu into Liang, it could be trusted, but not completely trusted. Currently, the northern and southern territories near Guangling River were in a mess. Yin King Zhao Bing, Shu King Chen Jibao, King of Jing In, Zhao Sun, and Liang, these 3 vassal kings were working together. Maybe the Liang court that was loyal to the Zhao family still felt that with Gu Jiantang, this stabilizing force, the court still had some advantage. However, Su Fengyan knew that Gu Jiantang's fate with the Zhao family of Great Peace City had come to an end. His son-in-law Yuan Tingshan had betrayed the court during the Spring Snow Building's celebratory feast. In the eyes of outsiders, he had given his father-in-law, Gu Jiantang, a difficult problem. However, that ambitious mad dog had also gone with the flow. Right now, Su Fengyan, other than the situation outside the Guanbai border, was truly worried about the grain that the court had promised before entering Liang. With his friendship with King of Jing and Zhao Sun, and the fact that Zhao Sun was about to be pushed onto the dragon throne, it would be strange if the court's grain could be smoothly transported to Lingzhou. Originally, these things were not a problem. Even if Zhao Sun really did put on the dragon robe, he was just a puppet. He could speak, but he could not truly change the situation. Even if Yin King Zhao Bing was wary of Bailiang, as long as Zhao Zhu was there, he could still change the situation. However, ever since he met Lin Honyuan, Su Fengyan had to prepare for the worst, which was that Bailiang would face the greatest predicament of being attacked from the front and back. Su Fengyan carefully chewed on a peanut and calmly said, "Zhao Zhu, you force me to fight with you. Even if I can't sit on that throne in the future." Su Fengyan sighed and did not say any harsh words. That evening, the Gerfalcon sent a secret message from Wutangyan on Mount Qingliang. It only had 4 words. They have arrived at Liangzhou. These 4 words were personally written by his second sister, Su Weisheng. Furthermore, one could tell that she had written them with great care. This was a secret matter that had been planned for a long time. Even the Whisk Room and the Eagle Room did not participate in it. From beginning to end, it was only Su Weisheng who planned it. A few years ago, when Su Fengyan traveled to Jianghu for the second time, other than the old man with the sheepskin fur coat and the little mud man, there was also Lu Qiantang, who later died in the reed marsh, and Xu Xiu, who was very likely to be the empress. there were quite a few people. Among them, the plump woman holding the white cat was very inconspicuous. In the end, she was borrowed by Su Weisheng from Su Fengyin and brought to Xianxia Academy. At that time, Su Weisheng said something very strange. He said that he wanted to use Yu Wei, whose real name was Yu Xuanji, as bait to fish out a 1,000-year-old turtle from the mud at the bottom of the lake. In fact, Su Fengyin did not think too much about it, and had almost forgotten about it. This year, Yu Wei, as Mr. Jishang of the academy, led a group of students from Bailiang Academy to study in Bailiang and began to teach in various academies in Bailiang. Only then did Su Weisheng tell him about what happened that year. It turned out that Yu Wei did not just have an extraordinary background. As a member of Dechu, Li Chungang had casually mentioned that there were female sword attendants in Dechu for generations. With their brilliant sword dance, they stood out in the world. Their cultivation was not high, but their skills were profound. It was really a strange thing. Yu Wei's mother was the last eccentric sword attendant of Dechu. Her chess skills were on par with that of the state preceptor Li Mi. As for why she was so amazing, it was originally a confusing secret of the Jiang family of Dechu. With the end of the Battle of the Western Wall, it was buried in the dust of history. Naturally, the world did not know. During the years when Su Weisheng was studying in Xianxia Academy, he only addressed 3 people as Mr. 2 of them were his teachers. One was the master of literature, Han Guzi, whose disciples were almost all taken in by Bailiang. The other was Chancellor Wang, who was the first to seek refuge with the Su family of Bailiang. He was also the leader of the scholars who died in the cold. The last one, Su Fengyin, was only heard to be a blind old zither player. He lived in the Dao forest of Xianxia Academy all year round. The news from Su Weisheng that he has arrived in Liangzhou was precisely this person. An unworldly master was still in the human world. Ordinary martial artists would think that this was nonsense. But ever since Su Fengyin met the eunuch of Tai in city who was the same age as Guo, or even earlier, when he met the real celestial being Gao Shu Lu, he began to understand a truth. Now, there was one more person in the world who could not be understood by common sense, Tantai Pingjing. This sentence was not nonsense, it was obviously a lie. The scholars who could become the sage of Confucianism, from the sage of the Zhang family in the north to Chao Chongqing in West Chu, did not have a good ending. People of the same 3 religions, Buddhism and Taoism, almost every generation had people who succeeded in proving their Tao, reaching perfection, or ascending. Why was it that only Confucianism did not have a good ending? Tantai Pingjing once used her identity as a qi cultivator to explain that it was caused by the Tao of heaven. Su Fengyin felt that what she said made sense, but she did not explain the whole reason. Su Fengyin, who was in a daze, suddenly remembered something. He put down the wine pot and plate, got up, and ran to fetch water. Late at night, the elephant washing pool should have finally quieted down. Then, he filled the water tank with water. But just as Su Fengyin pushed open the green bamboo fence, he could not help but jump up and curse. In the middle of the night, there were 2 groups of people coming to the elephant washing pool. Chapter 1898. Su Fengyin hesitated for a moment. He didn't care anymore. Those Jianghu ruffians could do whatever they wanted. If they really pissed him off, he would let those bastards have a taste of the cool autumn air and cold water bath. He carried the burden and continued to walk in that direction. Stepping on the fragmented moonlight shining through the bamboo forest and approaching the elephant washing pond, Su Fengyin already had a rough understanding of the situation. 2 groups of foreign Jianghu people had a conflict when they were burning incense during the day. Because Bailiang's laws were harsh and they had already learned a bloody lesson, they didn't dare to fight in public. The 2 sides agreed to spar at the elephant washing pond in the middle of the night and secretly signed a life and death agreement. They were not allowed to bring weapons and were responsible for their own lives. After the event, they were not allowed to tell the local authorities of Bailiang at the foot of Mount Wudong. Even if they accidentally leaked it, they had to grit their teeth and not implicate others. When Su Fengyin reached the end of the bamboo forest, he stopped and looked up. He saw 2 groups of people fiercely confronting each other by the elephant washing pond. 7 or 8 people against 20 people. There was a great disparity in numbers, but the former's momentum was stronger, while the latter's military strength was superior. However, the situation was somewhat silent, allowing the leader of the 7 or 8 people to poke and point at their noses. Su Fengyin turned his head and looked. On the huge rock in the middle of the pond, a graceful figure that was originally lying on her back sat up. The woman basking in the moonlight in the middle of the night didn't make a big noise, but when it was discovered by some Jianghu people with sharp ears and eyes, the atmosphere instantly became awkward. After she sat up straight, she faced the 2 groups of people who were speechless and said, "You guys continue. Don't pay attention to me." Everyone looked over. The water in the pond swayed, and the moonlight dazzled. They saw her sitting alone on the rock with a pair of boots neatly placed on her left and a jug of wine on her right. Her appearance was not outstanding, but at this moment, it made her look hazy and made her look even more beautiful. After she opened her mouth to speak, the wine emboldened people, and the beauty emboldened them even more. The burly man who was originally pointing at people's noses and scolding them suddenly shouted with a thunderous voice. He heavily clenched his fist and slapped his chest. "Wang Songfeng, I've roamed Jianghu for dozens of years. What did I rely on? He relied on the word righteousness. I don't care who is right or wrong between you and Li Bangxian during the day. Since he found me, it means that he treats me, Hong Mingtang, as a friend. Even if you've invited clan leader Tang and great hero Song to help, we'll rely on our own abilities today. According to the rules of the underworld, the one who kneels down in the end will admit his mistake." The short man in front of him rolled his eyes, jumped up, and slapped him in the face. In the pugilistic world, if beating someone up was considered as starting a feud, then beating someone up in the face was considered as starting a feud. As a result, the 2 sides began to fight because of the woman's interruption. At first, some people still cared about their status, but in the end, they became more ruthless. They used all kinds of unorthodox moves, such as kicking the crotch, the black tiger, the heart, the monkey picking the peach, and so on. Moreover, they seemed to be using them to the point of perfection. There were all kinds of situations where the donkey rolled around and the dog ate shit. Tragic. Su Fengyin, who was watching from the side with a bucket of water, felt pain for the heroes who had been beaten up. How could it not hurt to be slapped in the face and spin a few times in the air before landing on the ground? How could it not hurt to be kicked in the crotch and roll around while clenching their teeth and not crying for their parents? How could it not be heroic? Su Fengyin, who didn't attract any attention, took this opportunity to go to the elephant washing pool and fill 2 wooden buckets with water. The woman had already put on her boots. She floated to Su Fengyin's side with a wine pot in her hand. She had a strange look in her eyes. Su Fengyin stopped what he was doing and asked with a smile, "Manor Master Tong, are you in the mood for leisure?" The young female head of Jinsua Knife Manor said seriously, "Tong Shanquan has engraved the prince's parting words in my heart. Legend has it that the elephant washing pool has always been the place where the Wudong sword maniac Wang Xiaoping practiced his sword. He once used a bamboo sword to cut down a waterfall, so he wanted to come here and try. Unfortunately, he didn't get anything." Su Fengyin said softly, "Everyone has their own fate. There's no need to force it, especially when you're about to break through a bottleneck. You can't rush it." Tong Shanquan had 2 famous knives at her waist, Wuda and Tianbao. She nodded. She clearly didn't have a knot in her heart about returning home disappointed tonight. This was in line with Su Fengyin's impression of her. She was magnanimous. Su Fengyin shook his shoulder pole out of habit, no different from a villager carrying water in the countryside. Before they parted, he smiled at her and said, "If you don't mind, I'll have someone bring you one of Wang Xinji's fist manuals and some of my own knife skills." Tong Shanquan was stunned. She then asked directly, "Does the prince need me to do something?" Su Fengyin nodded and said, "Of course." Tong Shanquan blinked her eyes. Su Fengyin continued, "In the future, when you practice the knife and become a knife master even better than Gu Jiantang, it would be even better if Grandmaster Tong could tell others that you were taught by someone in Bailiang when you travel the Jianghu." Tong Shanquan smiled slightly and said crisply, "Okay." At this time, Someone sneaked over to them. Su Fengyin turned his head and glared. He shouted angrily, "My father has been the chief of Bailiang's green forest for 20 years. You mother of Asterisker, you dare to provoke me?" The person was stunned by his domineering attitude. He weighed the pros and cons. Perhaps it was better to be safe than sorry, so he turned around with his tail between his legs. Su Fengyin turned back and said jokingly, "I didn't say anything wrong. My father has always been the chief of Bailiang's underworld." Tong Shanquan couldn't say anything. Su Fengyin carried the water and left. Tong Shanquan looked at his back. Finally, he turned around slowly, tapped the ground with the tip of his foot, and disappeared. The elephant washing pond was covered in chicken feathers. Su Fengyin returned to the thatched cottage and poured the water into the water jar. When he turned around, he saw Dong Tai. Su Fengyin didn't criticize him. With a serious expression, he said, "I'll go get the knife." Dong Tai nodded. Su Fengyin knocked on the door and entered. He picked up the cold knife from the table and left quietly. Not long after, Su Fengyin and Dong Tai stood side by side at the top of the stone steps of Big Lotus Peak. Dong Tai asked calmly, "Do you know who he is?" Su Fengyin shook his head and said, "I don't know." The peach blossom sword deity didn't say anything else. He closed his eyes and rested. Su Fengyin said, "You don't have to do anything unless it's absolutely necessary." Dong Tai remained silent. At the foot of Wudong Mountain, an old man and a young man walked through the archway and slowly climbed the mountain. The young man was called Go Yufeng. He was once the lowest rung in the martial emperor city of Donghai. Until one day, the young man met a strange middle-aged man who carried a bowl into the city. There was another middle-aged man with an ordinary appearance following closely behind. The young man still didn't know that the former was Xie Gening and the latter was Dong Tai. After the young man left the martial emperor's city, he traveled around and met the hunchbacked old man. They traveled west together and came to Bailiang. The young man only knew that the old man's surname was Zhang. He called the old man Grandpa Zhang. The old man was an old-fashioned man who didn't like to smile. He was like a strict old teacher. Fortunately, although the young man didn't learn how to read, he was born simple and polite. The old man and the young man got along well. As the young man walked up the stairs, he muttered, "Confucius said, 'The way of heaven and earth is broad, thick, high, bright, long, and long.'" Along the way, the old man taught the young man similar phrases when he wanted to say something. The young man just memorized them. If he didn't understand the meaning, he just put them aside. When the young man recited the phrase, Confucius said, "When angry, you forget to eat. When happy, you forget to worry. You don't know that old age is coming." The old man couldn't help but sigh. Old age is coming, and people are about to die. Since the fall of the great Qin dynasty, for the past 800 years, generations of scholars in the world had to recite the words Confucius said in the books of the sages. Now that the imperial examinations were popular in Liang, there were more scholars. Naturally, the words Confucius said were more common. This Confucius said, it was the words of the sage Zhang of the scholarly school. At this moment, the old man sighed with emotion. "So, I've said so much." The young man asked, "Grandpa Zhang, what did you say?" The old man smiled for the first time. He rubbed the young man's head and said, "Yu Feng, you're my closed-door disciple. You can call me teacher in the future." The young man looked confused. The old man took the young man's hand and continued to climb the mountain. He said calmly, "You have many senior brothers. The youngest one is called Huang Longshi." The young man habitually called him Grandpa Zhang. He asked curiously, "Is it Huang Longshi who has the same name as the great demon of spring and autumn, Huang Xianxia?" The old man laughed it off. Chapter 1899. Wasn't it a joy to have a guest coming from afar? Su Fengyin was very unhappy at this moment. He was even unable to suppress his anger. Unlike his encounter with the eunuch in the small town in Yuzhou, Su Fengyin was not angry at all during that dispute. He even regarded the eunuch as a gentleman. However, this strange guest who climbed the stairs brought an inexplicable sense of irritation to Su Fengyin after he appeared at the foot of the mountain. At Su Fengyin's level, he could predict the future. Therefore, Su Fengyan was certain that the person who climbed the mountain was not someone who would provide timely help like Dong Tai. The level of danger was very likely no less than Xianxia's 10,000-mile sword that originated from the Dongyue sword pool. It could even be compared to Wang Xianji's death alone. However, Su Fengyan was mentally prepared for Wang Xianji and Xianjia's appearance. One of them was doing it for her own martial arts, while the other was doing it for the emperor. Su Fengyan could understand their loyalty to the emperor. But at this time, the old man, who was becoming clearer and clearer in his field of vision, was like an unexpected disaster that he could not avoid. How could Su Fengyan, who had originally planned to go to Jibei City tomorrow morning, not be angry? It was like a person sunbathing in front of his house. He was clearly not in anyone's way, but a passerby inexplicably threw a bucket of feces and urine at him. The peach blossom sword deity, who clearly sensed Su Fengyan's disturbed state of mind, frowned and said, "Are you planning to surrender without a fight?" Su Fengyan took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "It's good that you're angry. You could just beat him to death." Dong Tai gently pressed the Taia sword at his waist. Sword Qi instantly filled his sleeves, and he said in a serious tone, "That person can't be underestimated. Even after Chao Chongqing switched to the way of tyranny, he's just like that. If you still want to fight the enemy with such a state of mind, then go away." Su Fengyan's face was livid. He closed his eyes and pressed his palm against the cold blade's hilt. His fluctuating mood finally calmed down. There were more than 100 stone steps between them, and the two parties were about to meet. The monk stopped in his tracks and rubbed the head of the young Go Yufang. He asked with a smile, "Is that uncle the benefactor who gave you the white wooden sword box?" The young man widened his eyes and looked over. As expected, it was that uncle whom he had met once before standing at the top of the stairs. However, the uncle who was eating wontons in the marshaled arch city was sloppy, and he didn't have a sword. He didn't have the demeanor of an expert. The old Confucian scholar, who exuded a decaying aura from his body to his aura, patted the young man's head and said softly, "Go say hello." The youth with the bamboo box on his back smiled when he heard this. Then, he walked up the stairs with light footsteps. Dong Tai was at the top of the steps. The young Go Yufang ran toward him, while the old Confucian stood still. Right at this moment, the old Confucian shouted 3 times in succession, "Dong Tai, Taia sword, the Wu family sword tomb." His mouth contained the heavenly law, and his words were followed by the law. At the same time, Dong Tai's figure flashed and disappeared. Only ripples were left in the place where he stood. Su Fengyan's sleeves were fluttering in the wind. The young man who watched his benefactor disappear was stunned on the spot. He didn't know when the old Confucian scholar came to his side and said with a smile, "It doesn't matter if you thank him later. Yufang, you can walk around after you reach the top. There is a house in the Purple Void Temple where Ancestor Lu's sword was hung for hundreds of years. You can go there and pay your respects." "Oh," the excited young man replied. He continued to move forward cautiously, brushing past the young man with the saber. Then he trotted away. The old Confucian scholar stood still and looked up at the young king. "Why are you still hesitating when facing a strong enemy? Did your Bailiang frontier army also cower when you met the Baimang cavalry outside the Liangzhou Pass? The Bailiang cavalry is the best in the world. It can't be that your Su family is bragging about it, right?" Su Fengyan did not make a sound. The qi in his body did not fall, and in an instant, it circulated 800 li. The old Confucian scholar's sarcastic provocation didn't disturb Su Fengyan's state of mind. It's not that Su Fengyan deliberately put on a defensive posture. It's just that he couldn't capture the old Confucian scholar's existence at all. It's impossible to stand still between heaven and earth. The reason why the female zither player, Xue Songwan, could kill people even though she was blind was that she had the wonderful, mysterious finger technique. She could sense the slightest ripple without looking at it with her eyes. The wind chimes seemed to be quiet under the eaves when there was no wind, but she could clearly feel them shaking. There was once a scholarly sage who described this realm and called it exerting force in the heart's marrow. Su Fengyan had fought with the 3 great grandmasters, Hong Jingyan, Tuoba, and Bao. Although his celestial being body was damaged and far from the peak, his realm didn't fall. In today's world, he was still second only to Dong Tai and Xue Songwan in the depth of the mysterious Finger Realm. Because of this, Su Fingyin didn't move. He still held the hilt of his sword and didn't draw it. The hunchbacked old man smiled and said, "If you're waiting for Dong Tai, I advise you to forget about it. This peach blossom sword god is now on the sword mountain of the Wu family sword tomb." He immediately rode his sword to the west. It would take him about 6 hours to reach Mount Wudong. There's no other way. Deng Tai is now at the peak. Jian's killing technique can be said to be the best for 1,000 years. I don't dare to take it lightly. Su Fingyin asked, "You want to waste my fate?" The old Confucian shook his head and said, "You're only half right." Su Fingyin's face was gloomy. The old man said, "I still want to find Li Yufu, the Wudong leader." Su Fingyin seemed to have made up his mind. He suddenly took the cold sword from his waist and stood with both hands on the sword. "As you wish. I can't find you, but it doesn't mean that no one can." The old man narrowed his eyes and said, "Oh, then I'll wait and see." In the main peak of Mount Wudong, in the purple void temple of the Great Lotus Peak, the statue of Zhenwu, great emperor that had enjoyed the incense of the mortal world for 1,000 years, was covered in dust. The statue, which was originally a dead object, seemed to have come alive. It stepped on the throne, and the main hall rumbled. The young man, Go Yufeng, had just walked to the square outside the purple void temple. Then he was stunned. A majestic statue that was 3 feet tall rushed out of the Taoist temple as fast as thunder. Every step had the power of a thunderbolt. Then it ran past him. It looked like it was going to go down the mountain. The young man blinked his eyes. He couldn't come back to his senses. Go Yufeng raised his hand and gave himself a hard slap. It really hurt. On the stone steps, the old man clicked his tongue and said, "Interesting." A series of thunder resounded through Mount Wudong. Behind Su Fingyin, a statue of Zhenwu covered in purple and gold jumped up high. It held a huge peach wood sword and slashed at the old Confucian at the bottom of the steps. The old man, who was dressed neatly, put his hands on his abdomen and said calmly, "A gentleman doesn't talk about strange forces." The golden-armored Zhenwu statue's sword slashed down with an imposing aura. Chapter 1900. However, just as the sword was about to strike the head of the elderly Confucian, it suddenly stopped in midair. Su Fingyin finally moved. Without hesitation, he directly used the 2-sleeved green snake of the old man. Although he used the coal blade, it was the same as Li Chuangong's wooden bowl. On the stone steps between the two, a thick and brilliant green sword essence flowed rapidly like a river. The old man smiled and said, "A gentleman walks the straight path." When a monk took a step forward, the originally still statue of Zhenwu seemed to break free from its restraints. The peachwood sword struck down before the sword essence. The old man raised his left hand and gently held the peachwood sword. At the same time, his right palm met the 2-sleeved green snake. This kind of leisurely stroll was like a scholar who had studied hard for many years, casually picking up a brush and writing on a whim. It was natural and without stagnation, the aura of a saint. The monk had straightened his back and walked up the steps step by step. His left hand held the statue of Zhenwu, and his right hand blocked the 2-sleeved green snake. The peachwood sword of the statue of Zhenwu. Li Chuangong's majestic sword essence. Under the contrast, the old man's steps were slow, but he never stopped. The old man even had the energy to say, "I'd like to see how long you can hold your breath." The purple chi on the statue of Zhenwu the Great Emperor was wavering. Visible cracks began to appear on the wooden sword that was almost as long as a person. From these cracks, countless rays of dazzling light bloomed. This statue of Zhenwu from the main hall of Wudong's purple void temple was, of course, not the Dharma of Zhenwu the Great Emperor. Su Fingyin had long given up on that fate and was no longer involved. But for some unknown reason, Su Fingyin quietly condensed his own fate into it after climbing the mountain. Previously, the young king had jokingly asked Dong Tai how to arrange his fate after death. The peach blossom sword god's answer was, of course, as carefree as ever. But Su Fingyin could not be so carefree. He had too many people and too many things to consider. Asking Fan Xiaochai to search for the wooden sword wanderer was the same. Many seemingly unintentional actions were the same. The old Confucian scholar's weathered face shone brightly under the purple gas and sword energy. He sneered and said, "King of Baoyang, I don't think you can do it with your own fate energy." At the beginning of the magnificent sword force, the young lord said in a deep voice, "Li Yufu, continue your closed-door training." The old Confucian took a big step forward and said in a clear voice, "Su Shao led his troops to trample the Six Nations and broke the spines of the Spring and Autumn dynasties. As a result, the Central Plains were littered with new graves. Now that he's dead, do you really think that the Su family doesn't need to repay the debt?" The boundless energy swords kept shattering in the old man's palm. The old man was also somewhat angry. He shouted, "Su Fingyin, do you really think no one in this world can kill you? Well, I let you do whatever you want. As long as you don't give up, Xie Guaniying's death will be followed by Tantai Pingjing's. Even if Tantai Pingjing dies, there will still be the next person." A purple gold date mark appeared between Su Fingyin's eyebrows. He said slowly, "The gentleman walks straight. My Baoyang cavalry guards the border, Hutu City, Crouching Bao City, Wana City, and Qingtsong City. Only those who die with their backs to the south will die." The old Confucian scholar suddenly pushed his right palm forward. At the same time, his left wrist shook slightly. The entire energy swords were pushed back dozens of feet. The statue of Zhenwu, whose peachwood sword had turned into powder, was thrown back hundreds of feet. Even when facing Su Fingyin, whose combat strength was not at its peak, the old man was able to gain the upper hand from beginning to end. The old man's unfathomable cultivation was enough to shock the world and make ghosts and gods weep. The old man finally reached the top of the stairs. In his sight, the young lord stood in the distance with a cold saber in his hand. A trace of blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth. The old man smiled and asked, "Even though you've fallen to such a state, you still don't want to use the entire Baoyang's fate to fight against the enemy?" Su Fingyin spat out the blood clotted in his mouth and took a breath of fresh air. If he had not been hit by Tooba's full-force hammer, even if the old man's cultivation was profound, he would not have been able to push back the energy swords with one palm, even if he could block the energy swords of the mortal world. Su Fingyin twitched the corner of his mouth and said with a smile, "My fate is indeed not much, but I still have a chance to keep you on Mount Wudong." The old man's eyes were full of pity. He said, "I thought you would say, even if I die here, there will still be a king of Baoyang on Mount Qingliang who has the same appearance and height. What, is this the confidence you have to fight me to the death? When did the leader of 300,000 Baoyang cavalry, the well-deserved grandmaster of martial arts evaluation, become so unambitious?" Su Fingyin tightened his grip on the hilt of his blade. The old man did not seem to be in a hurry to make a move. It was unclear whether he was worried that both sides would be injured or that both sides would be destroyed. He asked, "Aren't you curious who I am?" Su Fingyin sneered and said, "A stray dog." The old man was stunned and then laughed. "You hit the nail on the head. At the foot of Mount Wudong, there was a purple aura climbing the mountain. It was the statue of Zhenwu that the old Confucian had casually thrown down the mountain. Although the body of the statue was broken, the purple aura lingering around it was even thicker." Su Fingyin sneered and said, "I'm just curious why you didn't continue to pretend to be a blind zither player in Shangyin Academy's Dowd Forest." The old Confucian nodded and said, "No wonder you were prepared. It was Su Weisheng who revealed the heavenly secret to you. You're really cautious. Originally, you shouldn't have regarded me as an enemy because of how I took care of the girl surnamed you in Shangyin Academy. It's a pity that Tantai Pingjing won't help you now. No matter how many tricks you use, in the end, everything will be for naught." Su Fingyin held the cold blade in his left hand and held it horizontally in front of him. He put two fingers of his right hand together and gently stroked the back of the blade. The old man laughed and said, "An ant trying to shake a big tree." Su Fingyin replied, There was a disciple of your Confucian school who said that he was overconfident. The old man waved his sleeves. Isn't that because I misled him? Su Fingyin put his 2 fingers together and stopped at the tip of the blade. Silently, the cold blade was like a talisman. Gao Shulu had once been sealed by this move. The old Confucian was still calm and composed. He glanced at the previously ordinary Baoyang blade and felt as if it contained endless Tao. On the bright blade, there was a faint pitch-black dragon floating around. However, the old man was still in the mood to praise. Very interesting. The person in front of Su Fingyin should have been dead for 800 years, especially when the Dafeng dynasty was founded and the status of the Confucian school rose. After that, he was respected by the kings as the most sacred teacher of the dynasty. Countless civil officials, regardless of whether they were famous or not, accompanied him when he was alive and regarded it as a supreme honor. The Zhang family's holy mansion and the Taoist master's mansion of Mount Longhu had been known as the Holy Mansion for 800 years. However, no one really thought that the Zhao family could be compared to the Zhang family, especially in the hearts of the scholars in the world. The Zhao family was probably not even worthy of carrying the shoes of the Zhang family. This inconspicuous old Confucian. He was the first-generation saint of the Zhang family. Chapter 1901. The commotion caused by this battle of immortals was not small. On Wudong Mountain, apart from the wife of a certain white-robed monk who was still snoring, almost everyone had put on their clothes and got up. But without exception, no one wanted to join in the fun. The Battle of Li Chungang and Wang Xianji in Martial Emperor City. The Battle of Su Fingyin, Dong Tai, and Chao Chongqing in Great Peace City, and the Battle of Chao Chongqing attacking the city alone. There were also grand events of the Jianghu that were second only to these peak battles. They had all taught the people of the Jianghu a bloody lesson. If they had not reached that level, they should not get involved. Otherwise, they would be implicated. It was as difficult as ascending to the heavens to criticize the moves of those martial arts grandmasters. When the true peak martial arts grandmasters engaged in a life and death battle, they would not give the small fries the chance to clap their hands and cheer or be surprised. The white-robed monk without the string of beads on his chest sat on the bench in front of the hut, quietly looking up at the moon. A tall woman dressed in the same white robe appeared in front of him. The white-robed monk did not look at her. He only said softly, "The heart is sloppy and the world calls it suffering. Only you and I enjoy it." The leader of the world's Qi cultivators nodded and then shook her head. "You and I are the same, but not the same." The white-robed monk rubbed his bald head and said emotionally, "My daughter heard some nonsense from the foot of the mountain. It said that for the women of the world, it takes 10 years to cultivate Song Yushu, 100 years to cultivate Su Fingyin, 1,000 years to cultivate Lu Dongxian." The woman who was 100 years old but had a youthful appearance murmured sadly, "He does not understand." The white-robed monk sighed. "I'm more afraid of playing dumb." She suppressed her emotions and looked at the white-robed monk. "No matter what, I am a Qi cultivator. I will follow my heart." The white-robed monk made a sound of acknowledgement. "Then this poor monk will not invite you to tea?" She asked, "Is that all?" At this time, the white-robed monk suddenly thought of a young girl's clear voice. "Mother, mother, wake up. Father is secretly meeting with his confidant again." The white-clothed monk's complexion changed. He hurriedly stood up and said, "Sovereign Tantai, please don't leave. Help me explain. How could the woman who only cared about enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens care about these trivial matters?" She directly swept past them and disappeared. The white-robed monk turned around stiffly and saw his daughter gloating over his misfortune, his stupid disciple with sleepy eyes, and his wife aggressively running out of the house with a kitchen knife. The white-robed monk had a flash of inspiration as he said in all seriousness, "That woman is over 100 years old. She's not someone of the same generation at all." The woman was stunned. "So old?" The white-robed monk nodded vigorously. The woman rolled her eyes and turned to leave. "I'm as beautiful as a flower. At the very least, I'm still a middle-aged woman who's still charming. Why would I be jealous of an old woman who's over 100 years old?" The white-robed monk secretly wiped off his cold sweat and glared at his daughter. She made a face and said angrily, "It still hurts from being pulled by mother during the day." The white-robed monk said in a bad mood, "Who told you to tell your mother about the little private savings that I've painstakingly saved? You've shot yourself in the foot, haven't you?" The girl was stunned. Just when the white-robed monk was gratified and thought that his daughter had found her conscience and had come to her senses, she immediately turned her head and shouted, "Mother, although that woman is old, she looks very young. She looks younger than you." Suddenly, there was an angry roar that was more majestic than the Buddhist lion's roar in the house. "What?" The white-robed monk silently raised his head and looked at the moon. He guessed that this time, even Buddha couldn't save him. Buddha probably really couldn't save this monk who drank wine, ate meat, and married his wife. However, his stupid disciple suddenly became enlightened and bravely explained to his master's wife. He actually persuaded his master's wife to go back. The white-robed monk who had narrowly escaped death rubbed his cheeks and called his stupid disciple to his side with a smile. "Nambe, while the moon is bright and the stars are scarce, your mind is clear. Master will teach you the profound Dharma," little bald head sighed. "Master, you're so old, but you still don't know how to behave. No wonder Master's wife has been telling me, and that thing these 2 days, flies don't bite, a seamless egg." The white-robed monk glared at him. Unfortunately, his stupid disciple wasn't afraid at all. Instead, he said in a methodical manner, "Master, Buddha said that feelings against oneself are born from feelings. When hatred arises, resentment must be removed by observing the 5 meanings." The white-robed monk's temper was gone. Li Nanbei made a cute and playful pig face and swayed back into the house. The white-robed monk couldn't do anything. The stupid Nanbei suddenly whispered, "Master, I've actually been helping you string the prayer beads the whole night. I was afraid that Master's wife would find out that the string was broken and would worry about the impermanence of life. I didn't even dare to light the oil lamp. I just used the moonlight from the window to string the prayer beads." The white-robed monk's face was full of joy. He said matter-of-factly, "Master's daughter." The middle-aged monk, who was in a good mood, smiled and said, "Disciple, I'll continue to teach you the Dharma." The little monk was young, but he was already the Sanzang master of the 2 Zen temples. Whether it was the seniority of the sect or the profoundness of the Dharma, he was fully deserving of the title of an eminent monk. The little monk's face suddenly turned red. He said sneakily, "Master, let's put the Dharma aside for now. Why don't you lend me the 3 taels of silver you hid at Han Daozhang's place? Tomorrow, I'll buy some things and send them to Minyanji." The white-robed monk waved his sleeves and strode towards the thatched cottage. "The moonlight tonight is not good. It's not suitable to teach the Dharma." Only the little monk was left sighing. Chapter 1902. At the foot of Wudong Mountain, the statue of Zhenwu, great emperor, strode up the mountain with purple clouds rising. 2 people were confronting each other at the top of the stone steps. Su Fengyin was holding a talisman knife that was glowing. The saint of the Zhang family was still calm. His hands were hanging down, and he gently shook his sleeves. "You're really stubborn." After a long period of silence, Su Fengyin did not launch a thunderous charge. Instead, he appeared in front of the saint of the Zhang family in the blink of an eye. He leaped high, twisted his body, and slashed down diagonally. His sleeves fluttered, and he looked like an immortal. The saint of the Zhang family raised his arm and stretched out a finger. He smiled and said, "Benevolent Lushan." Su Fengyin's blade that contained a lot of gang qi stopped moving. It didn't even touch the old monk's finger. Between the two, there seemed to be hundreds of thousands of undulating mountains. They were separated by a thin line. Su Fengyin, who was in the air, almost said at the same time, "Open the mountain." His spirit was Li Chuangong's, "If the mountain doesn't come to me, I'll open the mountain with my sword." His move was Jian Zhehuang's 6,000 miles. The tip of the blade continued to press down. It was not overwhelming, but it was slow and firm. The saint of the Zhang family, with one hand behind his back, didn't seem to want to touch the talisman knife with a dragon hidden in it. Seeing that the tip of the blade was only an inch away from his finger, He frowned and said in a deep voice, "Wise Lishan." The hand behind his back quietly shook his wrist. In the middle of the mountain, there seemed to be a green dragon drinking water. A magnificent water column that was as thick as a well was quickly pulled up and went straight to the top of the mountain. At the same time, the saint of the Zhang family didn't give the young king a chance to withdraw his blade. He changed from holding the blade with one finger to holding it with 2 fingers. "I'd like to see if you're qualified to be the leader of the Baoyang cavalry." Su Fengnian, who was holding the blade in his left hand, looked calm. He raised his right hand and slapped down. The wind and thunder of the palm shook. The immortal touched the head and broke the longevity. The saint of the Zhang family, who was driving the long dragon in the pool to hit Su Fengnian's chest, had to slightly change its course to respond to the young king's palm. Previously, the old monk used one palm to disperse the green snake in his sleeves. Su Fengnian's palm was not inferior to the old monk. The saint of the Zhang family's hand was the saint of the Zhang family. The saint of the Zhang family. Of the saint of the Zhang family. The 2 of them changed their qi at the same time. The water column stopped, and the saint of the Zhang family slid back a few steps. Su Fengnian held the talisman knife and landed on the ground. It just so happened that the statue of Jinwu had already approached the top of the mountain and was about to attack the old Confucian. The saint of the Zhang family didn't turn around. Instead, he looked directly at the young vassal king with purple gold between his eyebrows and laughed. "I'll teach you what it means to cultivate one's body and mind, and what it means to resonate with heaven and earth with the Great Spirit." The old monk gently stomped his foot. Ordinary martial artists, especially grandmasters of external martial arts, paid attention to penetrating the earth and killing snakes and rats. They meant that if they stomped on the ground, the snakes and rats hidden deep underground would be shocked to death on the spot. But the saint of the Zhang family did not have any momentum. Instead, it was like an old farmer casually stepping on his own crops. When the saint of the Zhang family was about to reach the top, a clay statue suddenly appeared behind the saint of the Zhang family. It was dozens of feet tall. It sat upright and was level with the top of the big lotus peak. The clay statue holding a scroll was far more familiar to the world than the Xuanwu, great emperor of the north, who only enjoyed the incense in Baoyang. It was everywhere in the ancestral hall of the Zhang family, the imperial palace of the capital, the headmaster's temple, the school, and the academy. The saint of the Zhang family flipped his palm casually and laughed loudly. The vicissitudes of life are like watching the palm lines. The clay statue behind him slapped the saint of the Zhang family's statue with the scroll. The scroll was shattered, and so was the Zhenwu statue. Su Fengnian softly shouted, "Rise!" A huge statue with golden armor and hair stood up majestically from the mud and wood chips. One was standing and the other was sitting. One was the Taoist, demon-rinsing primogenitor in the north, and the other was the saint ancestor who was worshipped by scholars like a god. A battle between civil and military. The saint of the Zhang family laughed. "Is this the first-grade celestial state proposed by Gao Shulu, the law of heaven and earth? I didn't expect you to be able to support such a scene with your remaining destiny. It's a pity that you're a poor family." The old monk's smile deepened. "A scholar can't reason with a soldier? That doesn't make sense." The clay statue of the saint raised an arm and pointed lightly. The fingers of the Zhenwu statue clenched into a fist and smashed down heavily. The old monk said indifferently, "I also have some insights in my heart, and I want to share them with the world. Scholars study and help the world when they're successful. They point out the country when they're in the imperial court, and they take care of themselves when they're poor. They don't forget their original intention when they pick up the brush and flip through the book." Wherever the clay statue of the saint pointed, snow-white and thick gangqi, as big as the pillars of the palace, would constantly appear. The arms of the Zhenwu statue were shot through, and pitch-black holes appeared everywhere. When the 2 fists finally succeeded in hammering the head of the clay statue, they were already powerless. The 2 arms of the Zhenwu statue were broken and dissipated in the air. The clay statue of the saint only shook slightly, and it was far from hurting the foundation of its will. Therefore, The purple-gold chi between the young feudal lord's eyebrows gradually faded, and the saint of the Zhang family's aura did not diminish. The clay statue of the saint was also safe and sound. But what happened next caught the old monk off guard. The Zhenwu statue that had lost its arms raised its head, stepped on the stone steps, leaned forward, and hammered the head of the saint statue. The entire Mount Wudong trembled. Chapter 1903. Dust flew everywhere. The head of the Zhenwu Dharma form exploded, but the headless body still maintained its forward posture. The clay statue of the saint was still intact, but there were some cracks. The saint of the Zhang family deliberately touched the Confucian headscarf on his head and looked at the young vassal king, who had probably taken out his trump card. He said sarcastically, "It doesn't hurt. Is that all you can do?" This person's tone was always strange, but it was exactly as he said. Anyone in the human world who was his enemy, even if it was Su Fengnian, could only be an ant trying to shake a tree. The old Confucian narrowed his eyes and said, "I've already said that with your own fate, it's not enough to fight me tonight. Even if you're unwilling to use the fate of the entire Bailiang, why are you unwilling to gather the fate of the Su family? Whether it's Su Weisheng or Su Longxiang, they're not ordinary people. They're all people with fate. It's okay for you to gather some fate with them. Why do you have to support the situation alone? You're about to die. Why do you care about the details? Don't you, Su Fengnian, always joke that you never do a losing deal?" Su Fengnian ignored him and kept silent. Since he was young, as the eldest son of the Su family, he was the only one who gave all kinds of rare things to his eldest sister, second sister, and Huang Manor. He had never asked for anything from them. He had never even thought about it. Just like when he obtained the pair of young tiger Kuei, he did not hesitate to give them to his second sister and Huang Manor respectively. When he got the new sword Spring and Autumn from the swordsmith surnamed Qi in Beimeng, he also thought of his brother immediately. He thought that he could finally change the wooden sword. When he snatched the river soldier from Jiang Fuding, he also thought of borrowing the embroidered winter spring thunder from the white fox face. He could finally return the favor. Su Fengnian had always believed that he had gained too much, so he should not complain and should be generous. The old Confucian stared at Su Fengnian's eyes and sneered. A falling leaf indicates autumn. The first vassal king of Liang, who has 300,000 elite cavalry, is actually such an indecisive fool. It's ridiculous. Su Fengnian said slowly, "You can nag when you win. It's still early." The saint of the Zhang family laughed and said, "When I win you, you'll die. Who will I talk to then? Do you want me to nag at a dead person?" Su Fengnian's eyes were firm and his face was cold. "My master Li Yishan, the chancellor of the Shangyin Academy, Zhang Julu of Liang, Wei Jingtang of Jizhou, and many others. In my heart, they're the real scholars. It's lucky that you, the sage of Confucianism, did not dare to show up for hundreds of years. Otherwise, you'll be a laughingstock." The saint of the Zhang family did not take it seriously and said with a smile, "It's still too early to say that." Su Fengnian held his breath and concentrated. Since the disappearance of the Zhenwu Dharma form, it was harder to catch the old Confucian's qi. The old man raised his arm and waved it in the air. Suddenly, a 3-foot green gang qi appeared. The old man seemed to be lost in thought and sighed, "Maybe the descendants only know about my knowledge, but they don't know that it was me who started it." When the saint of the Zhang family condensed his qi into a sword, Su Fengnian instantly attacked silently. The old man stood on the spot and twisted his sword-wielding arm behind his back. With a simple sword stance, he blocked the talisman knife that was trying to cut off his head. After that, no matter which angle the elusive talisman saber appeared from, the saint of the Zhang family only used an ordinary sword-holding stance to defend himself flawlessly. The two sides' qi lasted for half an hour. Su Fengnian finally stood 20 steps away from the saint of the Zhang family. The old man was still calm and composed. The 3-foot sword qi in his hand was as powerful as before. The clay statue of the saint that he had invited into the mortal world did not disappear. It was still quietly looking at the foot of the mountain. The old man looked around leisurely and laughed. "Ghost talisman. It's not bad to use the remnant soul of the Beimeng true dragon in the talisman knife as the talisman gallbladder. However, it's a little far-fetched to use the divine lightning technique of Mount Longhu. What kind of lightning pool is this? How can it summon gods and ghosts? How can it suppress demons? There were 21 pocket-sized flying swords hovering around the old man. The 12 flying swords were given by Dong Tai. Black armor, childhood sweetheart, morning dew, spring water, peach blossoms, moth eyebrows, vermilion bird, yellow tongue, and golden thread tai. The 9 flying swords were later forged by Su Fengyin according to all kinds of life's will, and earnestly requested Mount Qing, Liang's Moism master Zhu to forge them. They were Fengdu's old Jiao Du, Yushui's fine beard, childish wild fox, sheep fat, Ant Shin. Above each of the motionless flying swords, there was a yellow talisman glittering with golden light floating above them. The saint of the Zhang family exclaimed softly and asked curiously, "Why is the word talisman gallbladder missing?" The Taoist sects in the world are divided, but at the end of the day, the talisman gallbladder is nothing more than a dozen words in the word aura. The talisman gallbladder has no words. You worked so hard to create this talisman. Where did this spiritual energy come from? Su Fengyin gripped the hilt of his saber tightly and sighed softly. This was supposed to be a lightning pool that he used to suppress the heavenly being, Tantai Ping Jing. As for what kind of talisman this was, it was obvious. Since Su Fengyin was in Beiliang, this talisman was naturally the cold talisman. The 21 swords were connected to each other. The 21 talismans were connected to each other by lightning. The old man shook his head and said, "When you read to your heart's content, you can read through the rise and fall of 1,000 years. What's a small lightning pool?" The saint of the Zhang family stood on the spot. He held the sword in one hand and dipped the other in his saliva. He made a gesture of flipping a book. The pages flipped. Every time a page was flipped, a flying sword would fall to the ground. When the last flying sword swayed and fell, Su Fengyin held the saber with both hands for the first time and began to run forward. The saint of the Zhang family waved his sleeve and dispersed the 3-foot aura. He stepped forward and sneered, "Do you really think I'm afraid of your mountain sealing technique?" In an instant, the old man's left hand gripped the tip of the saber. Just as the Confucian saint was about to slap him with his right hand, he stopped and frowned. A ray of rainbow light suddenly cut through the sky from the elephant cleansing pool and then fell behind the old man at a faster speed, or in other words, in front of the saint's clay statue. The sword was called snow armor. When the sword fell, there was no snow, but it brought 2 brilliant beams of light from the sky. It was like opening the gate of heaven. The saint of the Zhang family said helplessly, "You're really annoying." The old man probably wanted to save his strength to deal with the brilliant gate of heaven. He just let go of the tip of the saber, then pushed the young lord away and turned around. The saint's clay statue seemed to be pulled by someone and slowly slid into the gate of heaven. Its towering figure gradually disappeared. The old man lifted one foot and stepped on the ground one after another. It landed and took root. There seemed to be a strong wind blowing behind the old man. His sleeves fluttered as he fell toward the gate of heaven. Su Fengyin turned his head to the east and said in a deep voice, "Sword, come." Still thousands of miles away, the peach blossom sword god who was flying on the sword laughed and replied, "One sword tomb of the Wu family, 200,000 swords, is that enough?" If you like to watch the heroes and heroines in the snow on your mobile phone, you can follow my WeChat public account, Fengla 1985. The snow is coming to an end. If you follow me, I believe there will be a lot of surprises. Not only some fragmentary writing experience in the snow, but also some future chapters, some of the bad stories I have never published publicly, some of the songs I like to listen to when I write my own words, and some activities of giving autograph books, update notices, etc. will be posted on my WeChat public account. Chapter 1904. The Gate of Heaven Open Wide. Vaguely, one could see the heavenly maidens scattering flowers. In a trance, one could hear the chanting of Sanskrit and the ringing of celestial bells. Of course, it was to forcibly recruit the first ancestor of the Confucian school. This kind of formation was like the grand Kai sect of the world, welcoming a distinguished guest. At this critical moment, the old man still had the mood to turn around and smile at the young lord. My old body has been buried in the ground for hundreds of years. I can't stand your torment. Then the old man looked to the east and laughed. You, the peach blossom sword god, are too narrow-minded. As a junior in Jianghu, you don't know how to respect your elders. Do you really want to take revenge on the same night? Su Fengyan's face was solemn. Dong Tai drove more than 200,000 flying swords of the Wu family to Bailiang. He even needed the swords to go before him. Compared to the time when Qi Jiaj escaped to the foot of the mountain, Dong Tai needed to consume a lot of energy. Even if Dong Tai was regarded as the most powerful person in Jianghu, the most powerful person in the Finger Mysterious realm, and the best swordsman in the past 1,000 years, Su Fengyan knew how difficult it was for Dong Tai to drive the entire ancient swords of the Sword Tomb at the same time. The more difficult it was, the greater the burden on Su Fengyan. Especially the old man in front of him was so calm. How did it look like he was struggling before death? The saint of the Zhang family slowly retracted his gaze and looked at Su Fengyan again. He said calmly, "Young man, let me give you a sentence. Deep love will not live long, and extreme wisdom will hurt. You have both. It will be difficult for you to have a good ending. As a person, muddle through. It is rare to be confused, so you can relax." The flying swords that originated from the Sword Tomb were densely packed. There were almost no gaps. Wherever they passed, mountains appeared in the sky, blocking the moonlight. Su Fengyan no longer concealed himself. His chi circulated rapidly, and his divine will reached its peak in an instant. Using this as a guide, he was like a lone candle in an eternal night, attracting moths to the flame. In the face of Su Fengyan's determination, the old man's eyes flashed with a touch of complex emotions. He no longer had the mood to ridicule the young king, nor did he look at the gate of heaven that was no different from a dragon's pool or a tiger's den for him. Instead, he turned around and looked down. The ground where his feet stood was cracked like a spiderweb. After the old man raised his head, he turned his back to Su Fengyan and said indifferently, "It's said that a scholar knows everything in the world without going out. I've long heard about your battle with Wang Xianji. That woman surnamed Jiang tried to force Wang Xianji's hand away by opening the heaven gate with her sword. So how could she make me go to the celestial court? Besides," the old man, whose hair was fluttering in the wind, suddenly turned his head. His eyes were cold as he said in a serious tone, "Besides, Lu Dongxian can pass through the divine gate and return. Can't I do the same? It's not that I can't, but I really don't want to." The old man turned his body and finally turned his back to the gate of heaven, facing the young man. "A tree will wither one day, and a man will run out of strength. Today, I'll let you know that even if you, Su Fengyan, have invincible cavalry, and even if you're a grandmaster of martial arts evaluation, there will be a time when you have no choice but to accept your fate." Su Fengyan laughed in the face of the strong wind. "Do you know that people in later generations have ridiculed you as a person who knows what's impossible but still does it?" Su Fengyan continued. "Do you know that a quasi-sage in the Confucian school whose status is only second to yours said, 'Even if there are thousands of people, I will go forward'?" The old man said indifferently, "Those are good words, better than your words of a stray dog." Su Fengyan and the saint of the Zhang family looked at each other. Although the heart may not be able to reach it, it can still make people yearn for it. When Su Xiao was old, he told me in private that he didn't like all the scholars in the world. But when he remembered how many times in the early years he saw scholars together in the palace, each in high spirits, the jade pendants on their waists jingling, he really envied them. It was so pleasant to the ears. Finally, the old man said, "Generally speaking, if things are not at peace, they will make a sound. Since that's the case, Su Fengyan, do you have any last word for this world?" The talisman on the cold blade had disappeared. Su Fengyan hung the new cold blade of the Su family's 6th generation. Countless heroes have died in Bailiang. Every family has a white scarf. Most of them don't leave behind any last words, and they don't need mine. The old man shook his head and said, "That's because you haven't really lost all hope. Su Fengnian, who was indifferent, raised his palm as if he was grabbing something. The saint of the Zhang family snorted. Dong Tai's flying sword is not bad, but it must be able to reach Wudong Mountain. The old man also raised his arm and then pressed down. Drop the sword for me. The first wave of flying swords that had already approached Beiliang and Yuzhou were nailed into the ground like arrows at the end of their flight. The extremely spectacular scene at the junction of Yuzhou and Hezhou. The wind blew and the rain fell, and the flying swords drew an arc in the air and stabbed into the ground. They fell on the mountains, the rivers, the fields, and the yellow sand. It was like a heavy snow falling on all the places where there was no one. The young man who had been leading the flying swords to the cold had a trace of scarlet blood between his eyebrows. However, the place where the sword fell was getting closer and closer to Wudong Mountain. A wave of slanted flying swords was less than 100 miles away from the big Lotus Peak, and the young king's ears, nose, and mouth also began to bleed. After the saint of the Zhang family pressed down with his palm, his originally motionless body slid back a step, and he was one step closer to the gate of heaven. When a wave of more than 1,000 flying swords landed on the green bamboo peak to the right of the big Lotus Peak, the young man's eyes began to bleed. His face was already covered in blood. When a flying sword landed in the deep stream outside the big Lotus Peak, Su Fengnian's face was already blurred. But that unknown rusty ancient sword was already the last of the 200,000 flying swords in the Wu family sword tomb. But that saint of the Zhang family, even if he seemed to have his back against the gate of heaven, his feet were still standing outside the threshold. The difference of one step was like the difference between heaven and earth. In the human world of the heavenly court, the old man lowered his head and looked at the 3-foot sword called Armor of Snow, and gently pressed down with his free left hand. The young man, whose face was covered in blood, slightly twitched the corner of his mouth. The old man, who was clearly not looking at the young vassal king, seemed to be able to see through the mysteries of heaven. I know that you still have one last sword, but no matter how much you calculated, you would never have thought that in the entire northern Liang Pass 4 provinces, you would be able to borrow that sword no matter where you went. Only on Wudong Mountain, you would not be able to do it. After all, Wudong Mountain is a peaceful place for Taoists, and since ancient times it has been the ancestral court of Taoism,